Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Ways and Means Committee. It's Friday, February.
Sorry, before we start, could we have the ASL interpreter?
Uh, is she not in the room yet?
Could you
Cheryl.
start interpreting?
Cheryl Cooper is here for interpreting.
I was just sending the link to the other interpreter. I can start now.
Okay, thank you. All right, starting again. Welcome everyone to the Ways and Means Committee. It's Friday, February 5th. Welcome to our hearing today on, I believe, 11 education bills. Just for anyone, if you were here for either House Bill 614 or 616, they have been withdrawn by the local delegation. We are taking Delegate Chee's House Bill 651 first because of the interpreters that we have here today. Next, we have two bills that were jointly assigned with the Appropriations Committee. I know you all have to be gone by 2, so we'll do the best we can. Thank you. So, Delegate Chee, please begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good to be back to see all of you colleagues of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Lily Chee, here to present HB 651. HB 651 seeks to establish minimum professional standards for our sign language interpreters in public schools, so our children who are deaf and hard of hearing can get the same quality education as their hearing peers. As you recall, this committee heard the bill last session. Several of you have since reached out to express your appreciation for that hearing and even inquired about this bill's co-sponsorship, including Delegate Guyton and Delegate Lasanti. So I want to thank you very much. And I also very much appreciated the thoughtful questions from Subcommittee Chair Delegate Ebersol. Over the past year, my team and I have worked hard to engage the education community and the advocates of this bill to make sure we address any concerns or questions and bring the parties together. At the core of the concern was how this bill would affect the current employees of our school systems who are already doing their jobs. I'm very pleased to report to this committee that after many months of conversations, the Maryland State Education Association is in support of this bill and our amendments, which you should have access to, that reflect the common ground we have reached. So why is this bill needed? Simply put, about 90% of deaf and hard of hearing children are born to hearing parents, which means most children struggle to communicate with their parents and have to rely heavily on educational interpreters at schools to help them learn and be understood by their peers and teachers. You can imagine how much harder it is nowadays when children are learning from home with their parents. The educational interpreters play a critical and essential role in the educational success of our children. They are professionals for which there are industry standards for licensing and certification, just like the teachers. In fact, 45 states have adopted such professional standards, but Maryland is not one of them. Each school district in Maryland has its own practice of hiring, assessing, and compensating its educational interpreters. Some full-time, some part-time, some treated like teachers, others like contractors. As a result, the qualities and compensation of our educational interpreters vary greatly across Maryland's school districts. We have no doubt that the current educational interpreters are doing the best they can to serve our children of special needs and consider themselves highly competent professionals. But without a baseline standard, we simply don't know how to assess and evaluate their performances, which is unfair to these professionals or our children. At the core, this bill is about educational equity and access for all students. As noted by MSCEA's testimony, which you will see, this legislation will ensure that a significant player in the process is well equipped to execute their responsibilities to ensure fair access to all of Maryland's students. As someone who had to struggle with language barriers when I first came to this country, I can very much relate to what it's like to try to keep up with the most basic of communication needs just to function. But I Also know that my barrier was one that I could overcome with my personal fortitude and perseverance, not a birth condition like deaf or hard of hearing. This bill will not only improve our children's education, but also improve the standing of our educational interpreters as professionals who are integral to our educational system and make Maryland's public education on par with the rest of the country. On a practical note, there are only about 150 total educational interpreters in our entire state across all counties, with about 1/3 of them in Montgomery County school system, which is also on board in support of this bill. We're very grateful for the support of parent advocates, educators, and sign language interpreter professionals, whom you will hear from shortly. Thank you very much, and I urge the committee a favorable report this year.
Thank you, Delegate Chi. Any questions for Delegate Chi? Seeing no questions, I'll go to the first set of people signed up, starting with Michelle Morales.
She's actually having trouble getting into this meeting.
Okay.
I don't know who the host is.
We will check for her again as we as I bring in the next person. Sarah Rosenstrom. Is she here? All right, checking the whole list of people who are in. Let me get to the next name. We'll give people another chance. Rebecca Miner.
Hi there. Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, I'm Rebecca Miner. I am the program coordinator for the interpreter training program at the Community College of Baltimore County. I submitted my written testimony, but I'm just here to say that we are in support of establishing a minimum standard for educational interpreters. As Delegate Q said, deaf children across Maryland deserve better, deserve more. I find myself talking to other educators and seeing the experiences that deaf students have in the mainstream system is really disheartening. One thing that I wanted to bring to light from the community college, we are working on creating some more specific training in educational interpreting. We have been training interpreters since 1982. And our program is considered a generalist program. So we don't go specifically into one setting, but we are developing coursework in educational interpreting, and we have it on our books to provide a professional development session this summer through our continuing education program on preparing for the educational interpreter exam, the EIPA test. We also were the recipients this year of an MSDE Perkins grant, which is helping us to hire consultants and develop some specialized curriculum in training interpreters to work with kids in the K-12. And that grant will also fund us to have all of our May 2020 grads take the EIPA exam as a way for us to be able to show a baseline of how ready is a student who just graduated from an ITP versus someone who's been interpreting for has more years of experience. And so that might shed a little more light too for the counties across Maryland to think about it when they hire they hire students directly out of my program, even before they graduate sometimes. And I'm not sure that that's a great idea, but this testing that we're going to do this year is going to give us a baseline to see like what the average score is of students right upon graduation.
Thank you so much. We'll call a few others and then we'll see if anyone knows any of those people waiting in the waiting room who don't have their full name spelled out. It makes it a little harder. We can't invite them in until we know who they are. We next have Danica Wade.
Yes. Hello.
Thanks for joining us today.
Get set here. So, good morning, members of the committee. My name is Dr. Danica Wade, and I come here today as a community member and a professional to discuss the important matter pertaining to educational interpreters for the deaf and hard of hearing in the state of Maryland. Did you know that in Maryland, there are 150 educational interpreters working with deaf and hard of hearing students ranging from 0 to 21, and less than 10 of them are certified? Educational interpreters play an integral role in the student's educational journey. Not only do they facilitate communication in the classroom, but they are also often the student's only natural language model. Surely we can all agree that a child's language development is crucial to their success in school and in life, and those involved in the development process, namely the interpreters, should be required to maintain a higher standard of ethical practices and professional integrity. And in Maryland, these standards are non-existent. Maryland is one of 5 states that does not have certification or licensure for educational interpreters. So you can imagine the effect that this has on the quality of deaf students' experiences in the classroom and their language development. So to address this issue, I strongly encourage the committee to support this bill, which proposes that educational interpreters for the deaf and hard of hearing in the state of Maryland be required to hold certification and adhere to a set of professional standards. I can personally attest through experience, from personal experience and watching my parents, my deaf parents and my deaf brothers going through the system, and sometimes being in meetings and having to take over for the interpreter because there was no better option available. And it's just not ethical or correct. And that's why I strongly support that, or attest that a change needs to be made and a standard of quality set. So please support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have one more person that from the list, and I'll go back to the other 2 names, or 2 more people. Cynthia Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser and the entire Ways and Means Committee of the Maryland House of Delegates of 2021. It's a pleasure to be addressing you about House Bill 651, legislation to certify educational sign language interpreters. My name is Cynthia Gonzalez, and I am a sign language interpreter employed by a public school system in Maryland. Currently in the state of Maryland, there is no statewide credentialing or licensing process for sign language interpreters in any profession. Sign languages include American Sign Language, Pidgin Sign Language, and other manual forms of communication. I believe MSDE should be involved in that process for staff who provide sign language interpreting services to deaf and hard of hearing students in K-12 education, and I've worked hard over the last 21 months to ensure that that happens. The bill before you today establishes guidelines for the Maryland State Board of Education and the Professional Standards and Teacher Education Board to follow. Students who use sign language interpreters or educational interpreters have no guarantee that the services they receive meet any kind of standard. With the passage of this legislation, educational interpreters, like teachers, would have to show acceptable results from one of 2 nationally recognized entities. Proof of this would be submitted to MSDE, which would then issue a certificate. School systems searching for qualified interpreters could use that certificate as a measure of skill. Like teachers, the MSDE certificate would expire in 4 years, during which time educational interpreters would continue their education by accumulating continuing education credits and improving their skills. Adjacent states, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Virginia, and West Virginia, have established standards which incorporate, like ours, results based on EIPA scores or RID certification. Research has demonstrated that an interpreter who scores a 3.7 on the EIPA performance exam provides only 70% of the information being presented. Imagine if your future depended on only understanding 70% of the teacher's spoken information. You would exit school with an enormous lack of knowledge. So you will notice that 3.7 is the initial accepted score. Renewal of the certificate would require proof of improved skills. There will be comments about the funding language in this bill. I urge you to notice how many entities provide support to teachers, online trainings, universities, fellowship opportunities, and mentoring situations. That support is lacking for educational interpreters, and yet we are a crucial piece in the education setting. This legislation may be the carrot on the stick, encouraging colleges and school systems to invest in quality education for educational interpreters. We are cognizant of our role in the education of future citizens. Let's have all students have equal access to that public education. I appreciate the opportunity to address you this afternoon. I hope my comments today encourage you to support this legislation, which will improve the quality of educational interpreters. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Is Michelle Morales here? And then Sarah Rosenstrom. And then we do.
Michelle's still struggling to sign in.
Who is Michelle? What is, there's someone named Michelle who keeps signing in without her last name. We recently brought someone in with that name. So if you're able to help her or give her advice or let us know if she signed in with a different name. In the meantime, we'll take Dr. Egbert.
Okay, ready. Hello, and thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Dr. Lisa Lee Egbert, and I am a deaf member of the Maryland community. I am also the mother of 2 hard of hearing children. And I'm a Native American myself. I am a certified reverse interpreter in another state. I'm the co-author of several articles, and I represent I'm representing McDaniel College today. And I'm the co-author of this bill. I want to talk about one thing, that Maryland is one of only 5 states that doesn't have a bill like this. Hairstylists have certification. You know, personal trainers have certification. Deaf and hard of hearing students need to be respected. I appreciate Dr. Mauger's recent Dr. Miner's recent testimony about CCBC, the Community College of Baltimore County, and what they are doing. And I'd like to tell you what McDaniel is doing. At this time, we have set up 4 days of testing already in March and April. And before, I know that this committee had talked about not having enough proctors and so forth. But there are a lot of things that are required. So at this point, we need to talk about supply and demand. We are ready to provide the testing for about 3 months at McDaniel. McDaniel is open to setting up a master's degree program in interpreting, because at this point, Maryland does not have a master's degree in interpreting. McDaniel has a bachelor's degree in ASL, and Towson has a deaf studies degree. Both of those degrees technically can lead to a person being ready to take the RID interpreting exam. But McDaniel's position could be as a leader or a guide to a higher educational level degree. And also, I appreciate that you're listening to our needs to pass this bill.
All right. Thank you so much. Is Michelle or Mickey Morales here?
She's here.
I do see her, but I do know that the interpreter needs to unmute.
Michelle Hall. Oh, yes, hold on. Michelle Morales. Hold on just a second. Oh, great. Yes, I can see you now. For some reason, Michelle Morales can't see the interpreter. But I'll go ahead. So I'm going to go ahead. Except for we are missing part of her hand.
Oh, are you able to let her know that she needs to center on the screen better?
Where's the interpreter? I'm unable to see the interpreter. That's part of the issue. It looks like she's using an iPad, so it might be a smaller field of view. Okay, ready? Okay, my name is Michelle Morales. I'm an educator and I'm a faculty for students for the HB 651 bill. I'm here today to talk about children and the deaf and hard of hearing students in public schools. Deaf and hard of hearing children need to have access to the free FEPA, and they need to have access to communication. Public schools are responsible to provide communication based off of 3 laws: the Individuals with Disabilities Act, the American for Disabilities Act, and 504. Maryland is always prided itself in being able to be the most educated state in the country. In January 2020, Maryland ordered to have a list of 3 national qualified interpreters come to require an interpreter. Okay, hold on.
Interpreters must be certified by either the RID or the NAD. They must hold a certificate for education.
Thank you. I've just lost my screen.
Maryland is without any kind of certification requirement for educational interpreters. In February 1999, the Maryland State Department of Education published a 26-page guideline publication ensuring quality of interpreting in educational settings for deaf and hard of hearing students. That's 1999. Instead, now out of 150 educational interpreters, how many are certified? I think less than 10 are certified. That means about 140 educational interpreters are not regulated, and they are being paid by public funds. Educational interpreters earn a lot of money per hour. They get paid a lot of money annually from our state, and it's paid through public funds. Last year, it was up to us to try and conserve money. We were trying to help the deaf and hard of hearing students succeed in communication, but that guide did not work. We have to do something different. Lastly, is my time up? Oh, I do have a little more time.
You have a little more time.
90 to 95% of deaf and hard of hearing children are born to hearing parents, and most of them don't know how to communicate with their children yet. So during the early years, the early grades, deaf and hard of hearing children still are acquiring language. They're still developing their language. They need highly trained educational interpreters provided to enable them to have effective communication. Without effective communication, the deaf and hard of hearing children have nothing. So when they get poor interpreting services, they are deprived of equal access to their own education. And the problems mount every year. They're deprived of education because of their disability and the future of the community's health. We need to do something. We can't make it worse. We need to do something meaningful because we have no standardization in Maryland. So again, I'm asking you to please support the deaf and hard of hearing children for having a free and appropriate education and effective communication. Thank you so much for your time. I'm done.
All right, thank you. To members, does anyone have any questions for the delegate or for any of those who just testified? If not, thank you all. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 651. We'll go next to House Bill 550, a Montgomery County local bill. Delegate Corman.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I am before you today in my capacity as Chair of the Montgomery County House Delegation with HB 550. It's a local bill on the School Site Council Program. We're actually still working on this in our local delegation. As you know, Madam Chair, it was filed a little late, and so our delegation is still considering it and potential amendments and other issues. So I don't have much to add at this time. Local bill, we'll be happy to come back before you if the delegation decides to move forward with it and engage with your education subcommittee and the full committee members on the bill at that time.
Thank you, Delegate. Sorry that had to take three of you, Delegate Solomon, Forbes, and Grice, to be here for that sponsor-only bill with no other testimony. It's such a pleasure to have you all from Appropriations. All right, seeing no questions on House Bill 550, we will go next to another jointly filed bill. Delegate Solomon, House Bill 608, and for this bill, we have Delegate Solomon, Bridges, and Novotny here from Appropriations. Welcome. Go ahead, Delegate Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have a couple of folks here for a panel. We've got the Maryland Family Network, Chris Push from the Maryland State Child Care Association, Ruby Daniels from the Maryland State Family Child Care Association, Christina Lopez from the Maryland Association for the Education of Young Children, and Kevin Beverly is here as a representative of Montgomery Moving Forward. So I appreciate the ability to have those folks up with me, and thank you for the consideration of this bill. Before I get started, I want to also thank Delegate Ebersol, who's been just a real partner in our work around the child care community really since last spring with the pandemic, and that's where this bill directly came from. And his name would be proudly up there with me if we were allowed to have co-sponsors along with it. So I will be brief on this because you will hear straight from folks who are on the front lines, who are working daily with our children and with childcare providers across the state. But the fact is that the COVID pandemic has really decimated and really hard hit the childcare community. They have lower enrollment rates, significantly less revenue, increased expenses, and the majority of folks who work in the field and who own childcare businesses tend to be women and people of color, and they are hanging on by a thread. There's a couple of stats that I just wanted to share. So the Maryland Family Network that's going to be joining us shortly just recently updated their study, but there's one number in particular. Almost half of all the childcare providers in the state say that they are going to close if they don't get financial support. And we know that childcare is just so critical to the economy, to our recovery. The U.S. Chamber joined us yesterday. We had a rally with childcare providers, which I will say we had over 300 people. It's the largest Zoom that I've been on since it started. I think goes to show the desire and the need for this kind of support. And what we heard from the U.S. Chamber they showed that 11% of parents nationwide reported declining a new opportunity, such as a job or a new job, because they had to provide childcare, and 6% actually left the workforce entirely. Those may seem like small numbers, but when we think about the entire U.S. workforce, and our sense is that numbers in Maryland are probably fairly similar. That's huge. And as we talk about being able to reopen the economy, this is really a key part of it. And we've seen a lot of aid, and proposals for aid, but there has been nothing specifically earmarked for childcare. And that's really what we're doing in this bill. The last thing I'll say before I pass it off to my panel is, our hope with this bill was really a couple of things. We wanted to set the stage and really give the community something to rally around, in the hopes that, something along these lines will be included in, whatever kind of relief package the General Assembly works on. And the other piece is, there is nothing in the governor's budget that particularly or specifically details how the federal aid that the state received at the end of December will be spent. So, if the will of this committee and the Appropriations Committee is to use those resources, we would be totally fine with that as well. So the bill is left in here that if this were passed as a standalone piece of legislation, absent some sort of a relief package, this money does not have to come out of the general fund. I know when you look at the fiscal note and you see a $25 million number, it tends to jump off the page. There is nothing in here that would prevent the governor from using what was, we believe, $130 million from the federal government in relief for childcare to provide this sort of relief. And we know the Biden administration has proposed another fairly significant package of support for childcare. And we would use this bill essentially as a way to direct the governor where to put those resources. So we're not intending for this to come out of the general fund. And I just wanted to make sure that people understood that. So appreciate your review, hoping for a favorable report, and work to get this into a relief package, and happy to take questions and turn it over to my panel.
Delegate Solomon, any questions for Delegate Solomon? Delegate Solomon, as you know, there are no panels this year, so I have to work off the list. First person signed up is Tricia Swanson.
Good afternoon, Tricia Swanson with the Montgomery County Chamber of Commerce, here in support of House Bill 608. Our chamber and members have long advocated for a strong childcare system, understanding that childcare facilities are they themselves a business, but also because of how much this industry impacts our parental workforce. Prior to COVID-19, the chamber sought its board of directors thought leadership, and we asked them, what's keeping you up at night? And the answer above anything else was talent. And we deep dove a little bit more and we said, well, what is your talent concerned with? And reliable and affordable childcare quickly emerged as the front runner. And then, as Delegate Solomon mentioned, when COVID hit, the importance of childcare was only further highlighted. A few months ago, our chamber held a chamber chat webinar on the topic of childcare and COVID-19. In this webinar, over 120 local businesses tuned in, and one theme that emerged was the need for public funding to support this vital industry. Even if every resident were able to get a vaccine tomorrow, if a child can't go to a safe and reliable childcare center, employees will not be able to return to the workplace. And then looking beyond COVID-19, a strong and reliable childcare system in the state should be viewed as an economic development recruitment tool. To compete for talent with our surrounding jurisdictions and across the nation, Maryland must differentiate ourselves in the market. And childcare should absolutely be a part of that discussion, as our state has done exceptional and incredible work in the area of childcare, accessibility, and affordability. With that, I will thank all of you for your time and thank Delegate Solomon for this legislation and urge a favorable report.
Thank you, Ms. Swanson. We'll take a few more people and then a round of questions and then a few more people. Laura Wheeldryer. To the next person. Maybe someone should tell Ms. Wheeldryer to sign in differently, probably in the on the list. Kevin Beverly.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the House Ways and Means Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments this afternoon. My name is Kevin Beverly. I'm a former president, CEO of Social and Scientific Systems. I'm also a founding co-chair of Moving Montgomery Forward, a collective impact initiative of nonprofit Montgomery in Montgomery County. We are a group of leaders who are committed to strategic action in pursuit of innovative solutions to complex community problems. Our first issue is workforce development, and that work continues. I'm here today in strong support of House Bill 608. The bill aligns with our efforts to advance equitable and accessible systems change in early care and in the early care and education sector. We want to thank Delegate Solomon for sponsoring this bill and his leadership on these important issues. And as the delegate mentioned in his remarks, we support expanding this to include family child care providers. The child care industry has been struggling for some time, as you know, and this pandemic has merely exacerbated this situation. I mean, across the state, one of the biggest challenges to the survival of child care providers' businesses is that enrollment has diminished. Child care providers need help in the short and midterm to fundamental things like paying rent, operational and staffing costs, and accessing technical assistance for funding and other supports to offset losses due to low enrollment. Maryland's investment in this sector now, with these specific and immediate supports, will contribute to the return of workers to the larger workforce and ensure that this industry survives as we need it to. House Bill 608 is truly a lifeline, and for that reason, I urge your support. And again, thank you for the opportunity to present this testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Beverly. Good to see you, of course. Ruth Reyes.
Yes, how you doing? My name is Ruth Carolina Reyes, and I am pleased to be here. So I'm here today. My name is Carolina Reyes once again. I'm the owner and director of Arcoiris Bilingual Children's Center in Laurel, Prince George County. During my 22 years working in early childhood education, I have noticed that American society sees childcare as the old generic fashion name, as babysitters, but not as a place where children are prepared as socially, emotionally, and developmentally members of society. I come to you today to reemphasize the importance for you to pass Bill 608 with amendments to include all childcare, family and center-based, which will help alleviate the childcare community. This pandemic has brought a heavy burden to our shoulders, and the childcare community is trying hard to remain viable. We are educating young children in high quality and safe environments to that they are academically, socially, emotionally, and ready to go to kindergarten. Childcare matters. We care for our community children, and we are essential to our society, but we need help. I want to share with you some of the issues that I have been facing. My enrollment is only at 33% capacity, 19 children at this particular time, and which I have a maximum capacity of 57. Every month, my rent accumulates since I am not able to pay the whole amount. Two of my 4 classrooms are closed temporarily. I have converted a classroom for school-age children so I can help some of my families, teacher children, and my own children to be able to help them with distant learning. As a small business owner, I have implemented policies to maintain the viability of my center. This brings an impact to my families many times because they are not able to pay, the rent when we had to be closed. Just recently, I closed the center and my families couldn't pay. Teachers left the field, and now we used to have 9 teachers. Now I have only 3. This pandemic has placed a heavy burden onto organizations and small business like mine. At this time, I must face an issue in addition to this, that I had to find another location to put my business in. So once again, thank you for reading and listening to my testimony. Childcare is necessary, essential for our economy. So please pass the bill.
Thank you so much. We'll go back to Laura Wheeldryer from the Maryland Family Network.
Thank you so much. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members, and thanks for your consideration of the Child Care Provider Support Act. I'm Laura Wheeldryer, Executive Director from Maryland Family Network. We're a statewide nonprofit and leading voice in early childhood. And today I'm here to speak on behalf of babies and their parents who need childcare and on behalf of childcare providers who need your support. MFN has long been a voice on the critical nature of childcare. It is an unfunded public good that produces two-generation positive outcomes. Childcare allows parents to enter the workforce. Childcare is, in effect, the workforce behind the workforce. Early care and education has myriad benefits for children. I could use all my time to summarize the research about the critical role high-quality childcare can play in child development, but I won't. I'm going to say this: consider this an investment in your current and future constituents. The last 11 months have been catastrophic for childcare, which operates on a razor-thin margin in the best of times. As Delegate Solomon already mentioned, we conducted a statewide survey of childcare providers in spring of 2020 and found that providers were reporting significant financial loss, would need grants to reopen, and over half indicated possible permanent closure. Lest anyone think that this childcare crisis has passed, we have just repeated this survey and, perhaps unsurprisingly, have found that things have only gotten worse 11 months into this pandemic. Providers are now facing a two-pronged challenge: the challenge of dramatically lower enrollment and significantly higher expenses. So according to our statewide survey, childcare providers report that since March of 2020, their monthly expenses have increased on average $5,339 per month per location as a result of needing to purchase essential PPE and address other COVID-related health and safety expenses. What's more, providers are facing lower enrollment caused by fears about the virus. 79% of providers statewide say they've experienced a financial loss. That's up from 67% last spring. And the providers who participated in this survey, which is over 2,000 providers from every county in the state, report at being at 59% of their licensed enrollment capacity. And that is simply unsustainable. Again, a whopping 49% of childcare providers say they may close for good if help does not arrive soon. These results indicate that there is a significant threat to a critical service parents rely on to be able to work and to the overall economy, which relies on childcare. Please, on behalf of working parents, childcare providers who have been absolute heroes in the last 11 months, and on behalf of babies and young children, we urge a favorable report on HB 608. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Any questions for the last four people who spoke? I did have a question. This bill is providing grants forever to institutions that had drops in their business since last March. Why is it not just for a temporary time? And maybe this question is better suited to Delegate Solomon.
That's a great question, Madam Chair. We are happy to have it just be a point in time. We've drafted a couple of different amendments as well. We wanted to get the bill in, so happy to work on that too. And again, part of it is also, we think, for a year or two, the COVID relief money that the state got in December can be spent through 2022. So we didn't want to just necessarily tie it to one specific budget year as well.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Patterson with a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to have clarification because I heard both Mr. Beverly and Ms. Reyes address family centers or family care centers. So this is not just for child centers, but also for family providers or the small businesses. Yes.
Yeah, and Delegate Patterson, thank you. That was another, when the bill was originally drafted, the intent was to include both family providers and child care centers. In the amendment, we tweaked the language. There was a little bit of a drafting error, but thank you for pointing that out. And I actually forgot to mention that in my testimony. We did fix that.
All right, thank you, Delegate, for answering that question. I'm going to go to the next group of people signed up for this bill. Next I have Sarah Mickey. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Is she here?
Yes, that's correct. Good evening, Chair, or good afternoon, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the committee. I'm Sarah Mirsky-Mickey, Deputy Director of the Baltimore Jewish Council, which represents the Associated Jewish Community Federation of Baltimore, all of its agencies, as well as the organized Jewish community of Baltimore. I'm here today in support of HB 608, which has been explained by the sponsor and previous speakers. In Greater Baltimore, we have almost 24 Jewish early childhood centers, and they are suffering. Some, like the 16% of early childhood centers in Maryland, have closed due to COVID-19, hopefully only temporarily. To give a quick snapshot, we have 2 Jewish community center early childhood centers in our area. One has been closed since the start of the pandemic. The other, which was closed for several months in the beginning, is only now just operating at 60% capacity. For FY21, the center is projected to have a revenue, not a profit, of $500,000 less than the previous year. And this includes the funding help of the PPP loan. And costs have gone up significantly. They've spent about $25,000 in PPE. And think about this, whenever a teacher had a potential contact, that teacher has to wait for their test to come back. At the same time, our JCCs are paying that teacher as well as a substitute teacher. And during the summer and early fall, this meant a week, sometimes 2 weeks before test results came back, although now it is much quicker. But at that time, the JCC was paying 2 salaries for 1. If we do not help our childcare providers who have all suffered financial hardships during the pandemic, we will have another crisis on our hands when things eventually go back to normal and parents and guardians are required to physically go back to their office. If there are no or a scarcity of childcare providers, parents and guardians who are required to go back to the office will have to make that hard choice between going to their office or taking care of their young children. This will disproportionately affect single parents, women, low-income individuals, and low-income individuals. HB 608, which provides funding to help these childcare centers stay open, needs to be an integral part of our state's COVID-19 relief package. For these reasons, we ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is Rebecca Hancock here?
Ruby Daniels is going to be speaking for Maryland State.
Okay, you're on the next page, so please wait a moment.
Okay. All right.
If Rebecca Hancock's not here, Stephanie Lawson? Is Stephanie here? All right, now to you, Ms. Daniels.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruby Daniels. I'm the president of Maryland State Family Child Care Association. First of all, I'd like to thank Madam Chair Kaiser and Delegate Solomon, the bill sponsor, as well as the committee for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the 4,700 registered family childcare providers and the 140 large family childcare homes in Maryland. Our members unanimously support House Bill 608, the Child Care Provider Support Act. This legislation will benefit childcare programs that have been adversely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The small businesses are a vital part of the childcare delivery system, and many are in desperate need of resources to help them open up or remain open. Providers' income have dropped, enrollments are down, but the cost of doing business have increased. The daily threat of a positive COVID diagnosis means a program must close, deep clean the environment, and endure a lengthy quarantine with no income until reopening. This threat, as well as the fear of transmission, has caused some programs to close permanently, and still others hoping to reopen when it is safe, if they can do so financially. For months, many family childcare providers have cared for school-aged children who will normally be in school but are now in childcare homes or centers. Providers who provide care for these children that are enrolled in the Child Care Scholarship Program under MSDE are not receiving payment for the entire day. They're only receiving before and after payment. In essence, these providers are working a full day, but only getting paid for a few hours a day. Even at the height of the pandemic, family child care providers stepped up, opened up, and did our part. This bill will make the difference between many of these programs remaining in business or closing permanently. Prior to the pandemic, there was a critical shortage of childcare availability. The pandemic has made it worse. As people plan to go back to work, many will be shocked at the reduction of childcare services. House Bill 608 will enable childcare providers to stay in business and provide a vital service for the working families in Maryland. Your favorable support of House Bill 608 will begin the process of saving an industry that is vitally important to our future and our economy. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. And then last we have Christina Push.
I think I'm unmuted. Yes. Good. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, esteemed committee members. I'm Christina Push, Executive Director of the Maryland State Child Care Association, representing over 400 child care businesses and over 4,800 child care and early childhood educators working in Maryland. I am here to enthusiastically support HB 608. The pandemic has devastated many small businesses, including Maryland's child care sector, which is the backbone of our economy. Child care is private businesses that are essential and represent the public good. Child care is the key to the economic progress, allowing working parents to resume their job and stimulate the economy. Child care and early childhood programs are trying to effectively and safely care for and educate children and meet the needs of families, protect their staff, and cover all the expenses required to keep their doors open. Child care programs in every state already operate on razor-thin margins and teeter on the edge of financial health. Enrollment decreases significantly since March due to the pandemic have never fully recovered. Providers have high fixed costs and important teacher-child ratios that cap revenue capacity. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, our providers have faced catastrophic reductions in children served while fixed costs were unchanged and additional expenses incurred due to CDC guidelines for childcare. Additionally, PPE, cleaning supplies, which have skyrocketed in price, and temporary issues for, as my colleague has just explained, is, for instance, childcare absences and providers are not reimbursed, or when programs have to pay substitutes to cover for sick staff, when childcare is shut down for even suspected or confirmed cases of COVID, and parents have to find alternatives, has caused fear, frustration, permanent closures, classroom closures, and the result is devastating impacts on children, families, women especially, and our economy in the short and long term. Many child care programs are losing tens of thousands of dollars monthly, and our workforce is being stressed and depleted. The child care workforce are essential and they're heroes. We need the help now. We don't know how long we can sustain these losses. MSDE data reports there were 7,858 licensed providers pre-pandemic in March of 2020. As of December 2020, MSDE shows currently that there are 6,577 licensed providers that have completed a form and have been approved to reopen to serve children and families. There are 977 that have not submitted the form to reopen and 279 have permanently closed. So over 1,200 programs are not open. The loss of childcare businesses equates to the loss of tens of thousands of slots, and it's deeply concerning. Significant closures means less choices for families in the future, therefore continuing the inequitable access for communities of color and unaffordable childcare for far too many families. Without additional supports like HB 608, we run the risk of exacerbating the crisis that existed long before the pandemic, and making it harder for parents to work, especially women, leaving children without critical supports for their health, development, and well-being, and jeopardizing the livelihoods of childcare professionals, disproportionately women of color and immigrant women. Without relief such as HB 608, families will suffer a shortage of childcare when they need it, and it's safe to go back. The lack of support and investment will slow the recovery down. Delegate Solomon understands childcare needs help. MSCCA enthusiastically supports this bill and would add that we need to be inclusive of all childcare licensed in Maryland and interpret the good standing as all programs to ensure equity and support for this bill. We applaud your effort, Delegate Solomon, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the people who just spoke. Are there any more questions on this legislation? All right. Thank you, Delegate Solomon. Thank you to Delegate Bridges and Novotny as well, who are here on this jointly heard bill. And we will next go on, members, to House Bill 518, Delegate Dumais. You're still
You're
muted.
muted.
Start again.
I'm sorry. I obviously turned my camera on, but not the other part. Good afternoon, everyone, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair. Happy to be here to present House Bill 518, Public Libraries Electronic Book Licenses Access. Basically, the bill would require a publisher who offers to license an electronic book to the public to also offer to license the electronic book to public libraries on terms that are reasonable enough to enable the public library to provide their patrons access to the electronic book. The bill provides that the kinds of reasonable terms would be that the publisher would be allowed to say limit the number of users a public library may simultaneously allow to access the electronic book. Publisher can limit the number of days the public library may allow a user to access the electronic book, and the publisher would be allowed to implement technological protection measures to prevent a user from maintaining access to the electronic book beyond the specified access period and prevent a user from allowing others to use the electronic book. The purpose for the bill is to basically have the publishers negotiate with the libraries, because what's currently happening is if you or I were going to purchase an electronic book, it can be anywhere from $10 to $15 or $20. For the libraries to get that same book, they are talking about anywhere from $55 to $65 for a 2-year license. So we're trying to get some parity and basically allow public libraries, which are tremendous assets to us, to be able to fill their dual mission of preserving the written word and providing public free access to the widest possible array of books and knowledge. There is a proposed amendment that would expand this to include, and as we all know, the technology keeps changing, but would be able to encompass digital books or books that are read aloud as well. So I think it's important, and it's interesting when the information that was brought to us about this bill, Amazon and Audible, for instance, currently have over 20,000 exclusive titles, and they will license those titles, which include the high demand authors like J.K. Rowling, Margaret Atwood, Alice Walker, Dean Koontz, and others to consumers, but they won't do it to libraries. Additionally, Blackstone, which is a major provider of audiobooks, currently supplies 10 new titles per month exclusively to Audible. Libraries aren't allowed to purchase these titles for 3 months after the release. Macmillan is also another big one that does these things. Still only has limited library access to titles for 3 months. However, Macmillan did during the pandemic at least get rid of the 3-month restriction. But I guess they could revert to more restrictive policies. So we just want libraries to be able to have access to these things. We understand that publishers will have to negotiate with them. Attached to my testimony is a long list of examples of digital audiobooks that are on the New York Times bestseller and sort of what the consumer price is versus what the library price is. I'm happy to also have here today, I believe, I can't see them, but Michael Blackwell, who's the director of St. Mary's County Library, Tanya Atkins, who's the CEO of the Howard County Public Library, and Blaine Holliday, who's the director for collection strategies for the Prince George's Public Library. And I would respectfully request a favorable report for House Bill 518.
Thank you, Delegate DeMay. I was going to ask you why you thought that Harris Teeter provided 4 people to present written opposition, but members, if anyone who looked at their testimony, they were upset with House Bill 581, not House Bill 518.
Yeah, well, that's what we're hearing over in Economic Matters. We're hearing a lot of it. So
I'm sure, and it's a big bill. I'm sure you're getting a lot of written testimony either way.
We did.
Blaine Holliday, please, thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me in to testify this afternoon. I am Blaine Halliday from Prince George's County Memorial Library System. Public libraries have traditionally served as equalizers within the communities they serve by providing access to information for the citizens of those communities, regardless of any individual's financial or life circumstances. Prince George's County Memorial Library System supports HB 518, to ensure that citizens have continued fair access to electronic books. Due to their costs or other reasons, for many citizens, the public library is their only viable option for reading or listening to electronic books. Those who cannot or choose not to spend money on a copy of an electronic book nonetheless pay taxes to support public libraries, which we, of course, do spend money on the book. In these challenging times, particularly through the pandemic, providing this content to the public in a timely manner is more important than ever. Libraries are used to paying much more for access to electronic book content. A typical electronic book often costs an individual consumer less than $20 for unlimited perpetual access, while libraries typically must pay $55, $95, or even more for a limited time license, typically 24 months, to access the content. Libraries then have to repurchase access to the same content at the end of the licensing period, severely curtailing our ability to fulfill one of libraries' most important functions, that of preservation of our collective history. We do pay these agreed upon prices, adhere to the restrictions for the content, and work with the publishers as partners in order to fulfill our mission of providing fair access to information for all in our communities. We see HB 518 as helping the people of Maryland, creating an informed citizenry. HB 518 deliberately does not set prices or dictate terms of licensing. It simply asks that the terms be reasonable. We are not asking the legislators intervene in the marketplace between publishers and libraries at all. Both will continue to negotiate costs for their mutual benefit. We, as librarians, or as libraries, are simply asking to be treated the same as any consumer of the publisher's content. We recognize that prices may be higher for libraries versus consumers. They always have been. And that access terms may be different. They also always have been. But restricting what and when libraries can purchase that content is inherently unfair, as libraries are consumers as well. Consumers that are entrusted with their community's tax dollars to purchase content on their behalf. We feel that HB 518 will accomplish this and respectfully ask for your support in passing this legislation. I thank you very much for having me here this afternoon.
Thank you. Ms. Tanya Akins?
Good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and distinguished members of the House Ways and Means Committee for the opportunity to speak before you today. I am Tonya Akins, President and CEO of Howard County Library System. On behalf of the Maryland Association of Public Library Administrators, respectfully requesting your support for HB 518, Electronic Book Licenses Access. Access is an equity issue with immediate and lasting implications. Some current and past publishers' practices hurt Maryland library readers. Delegate Dumais touched on the fact that currently Amazon and Audible, which between them have over 20,000 exclusive titles, will license certain content to consumers, but not to libraries. Much of this content is in very high demand, including works by many well-known authors such as Alice Walker, Neil Gaiman, Dean Koontz, and others. A major provider of ebooks, Blackstone, currently supplies 10 new titles per month exclusively to Audible, disallowing the purchase of titles by libraries for 3 months after release. This time last year, Macmillan, which is one of the big 5 publishers, was also limiting library access to titles for 3 months. Macmillan rescinded this policy during the pandemic, but absolutely could revert to more restrictive policies later. A credit card should not be a requirement to be an informed Marylander. Maryland residents value and use their libraries, with almost 2/3 of the state's residents deeming public libraries an essential service. Maryland public libraries partner in many ways to leverage resources for the benefit of all Marylanders. And readers across the state look to the public library for access to electronic books. Ebook borrowing from our state consortium has been on an upward trend for the past several years. In fiscal year 21, Marylanders borrowed over 3 million ebooks from the consortium, and we are on pace to lend well over 4 million ebooks this fiscal year. In Howard County, use of electronic books spiked 71% over the last fiscal year. We do not anticipate these trends to fall off. Customers overwhelmingly express their appreciation for ebook services, with many sharing their intent to continue reading both print and electronic book formats post-pandemic. Customers also express their dismay and disappointment when their public library is not able to purchase the same electronic books available to consumers. Libraries already follow all publisher licensing restrictions on the use of digital content. HB 518 stipulates that we will act fairly, and we will continue to do so. We simply want to provide our customers the same content. In closing, I request a favorable report and your support of HB 518. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michael Blackwell?
Yes, thank you, Delegate Dumais, for your great support of libraries. Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and distinguished members of the community, thank you for this opportunity to testify. I am Michael Blackwell. I work on ebook and audiobook issues with library colleagues internationally through a group called Readers First, and nationally through the American Library Association's Joint Digital Content Working Group. I'm a real ebook geek, yes. But I'm addressing you today on behalf of Maryland readers as the director of St. Mary's County Library in beautiful Southern Maryland. On behalf of those readers, I ask you to give favorable consideration to HB 518. Now, here's the problem that Delegate Dumais has set out for you and my colleagues as well. We're partners in literacy with nearly all the publishers, but there are some who are holding out on us. Macmillan, for example, last year had a policy in place. For the first 3 months the title came out, our statewide consortium, millions of readers had one copy of that. We might as well not have had it at all. Waiting this build up, people get frustrated. There's nothing we can do about it, but that's not even the worst. As my colleagues have said, Amazon and its division Audible, some of the largest publishers of digital content in the world, will not share their so-called exclusive content with libraries at all. Tens of thousands of high-quality books not available in any other way, and library readers and listeners cannot get them. So I ask you to imagine yourself, you're staying at home, sheltering from the pandemic. Maybe you've even lost a job. You hear about this wonderful book. You'd like to read it. Like millions of your fellow Marylanders, you go to the library's website. You want to get it digitally. You search in vain. It's not there. It's not that we don't want to get it for you. It's that we can't get it for you. You go to Amazon, $14.99 an ebook, an audiobook, maybe $39.99, maybe more. So I repeat a question my colleague asked. Should you have to have a credit card to be an informed resident of Maryland? Now, how will this bill help? It's simply going to make those books available to consumers, also available to libraries on reasonable terms. This is not an anti-publisher bill. This is a pro-reader bill. The publishers are going to have full say in what they consider to be reasonable. We'll hope they're going to work with us on price a little, but that's between the publisher and the libraries. You're not being asked to intervene in that marketplace. And we're not picking John Grisham's pocket. We're paying agreed upon prices for these. And this is an increasingly desirable format. My colleagues have talked about the increase. In my library, it's up over 40% over last year.
Mr. Blackwell,
Yes.
your 3 minutes have wrapped up, so if you
Okay.
can.
Thank you very much. I ask for favorable consideration.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Any questions for Delegate Dumais or for the 3 individuals who are here today? Want to thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And we will move next to House Bill 609 from Delegate Place.
Thanks. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Thank you, and good Friday afternoon to the Ways and Means Chair, the Vice Chair, and the committee members. For the record, I am Regina T. Boyce, testifying today on HB 609, Public and Non-Public Schools Bronchial Availability and Use Policy, or the Bronchial Rescue Inhaler Law. HB 609 requires public schools in the state and authorizes non-public schools in the state to establish a policy to stock inhalers or albuterol in schools for emergency purposes, a rescue inhaler, requiring select school personnel to be trained to administer the inhaler in the absence of a school nurse, and removes personal liability of nurse and personnel. According to the Asthma and Allergy Network, 16.4% of Maryland children have been diagnosed with asthma. 56% of children with asthma do not have an asthma plan on file at their school. And it is reported that 19.2% of parents with asthmatic children report that their children miss 1 to 2 days of school because of their asthma. Asthma is one of the leading causes of school absenteeism in the country alone. Add to those stats the number of individuals who haven't been diagnosed with asthma and the growing shortage of school nurses, we have a risk management dilemma. In the United States, asthma is responsible for 10 deaths. Given these stats and risks, states are considering stock albuterol rescue inhalers in their policy and guidelines. Currently, 10 states, Arizona, New Hampshire, Georgia, Illinois, Missouri, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas, and Utah have stock albuterol laws. And 3 states, New York, Nebraska, and Indiana, have stock albuterol guidelines. At the federal level, Congressman Steny Hoyer introduced and passed H.R. 2468, the School-Based Allergies and Asthma Management Program Act, in December of 2020. The bill amends the Public Health Service Act to increase the preference given in awarding certain allergy and asthma-related grants to states that require certain public schools to have asthma and allergy management programs. The federal act allows states to create and implement programs as needed with financial assistance. This could not be timelier. What I've learned about asthma is that you cannot diagnose it without first having an incident or an asthma attack. Unfortunately for some, an asthmatic incident or attack is the first and last sign of respiratory conditions. Since March of last year to date, a deadly respiratory virus disproportionately affects those with respiratory conditions. An inhaler is an important and life-saving, as a current promising vaccine, as an EpiPen and naloxone or Narcan. It must be available in our schools, and it must be added as a stock item to the life-saving toolbox for our schools and school professionals. I would just thank you for your time and your consideration of HB 609, and I urge a favorable report.
Hey, Delegate Boyce, good seeing you again in our committee. Any questions for Delegate Boyce? All right, seeing none, I will move on to some of the people signed up. We have Elaine Papp.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
So my name is Elaine Papp, and I'm a registered nurse with a master's degree. I retired from my full-time job and worked as a part-time contract nurse for the Baltimore City Schools. I'm here before you to share my story and to advocate for passage of HB 0609. In 2018, I saved a student's life, but I lost my job. It was a harrowing experience. While working at Vivian T. Thompson Medical Arts Academy, a high school in Baltimore, a student experienced a serious asthma flare. Her asthma albuterol sulfate inhaler was locked in the gym teacher's office. The gym teacher was off campus. Although 911 was called, they were very delayed in responding. While the principal and the teachers frantically tried to find a key to the office, the student lost consciousness and was gasping for air at 70 breaths per minute, which is really high, with a pulse of 124. I was helpless. I knew that after loss of consciousness, the student would have a maximum of 15 minutes to live if untreated. I was watching the student die. Not knowing when the paramedics would arrive, I gave the unconscious student another student's asthma rescue inhaler. Within a few minutes, the student began to breathe normally and she regained consciousness. Her mother arrived. I lost my job because I made the decision to break the rules to save a life. This should not be a decision anyone should have to make. The rules are never give a student another inhaler or medication, and never give a medication if you do not have doctor's orders in the student health file. As a registered nurse, I had access to the Maryland asthma guidelines. I had EpiPen for allergic reactions and Narcan for opiate overdoses, but I did not have an emergency medication to treat the most common life-threatening illness among Maryland children, which is asthma. This bill also allows the training of non-medical personnel to administer a rescue inhaler in lieu of a medical personnel being available. This is not a new concept in Baltimore schools or Maryland schools. Teachers who accompany children with asthma on field trips are often trained and take the asthma inhaler with them, so in case the student has an asthma flare while on the field trip, they can administer it. Non-medical personnel administer inhalers to children 1,000 times a day. Parents, grandparents, caregivers, babysitters, etc. I urge you to issue a favorable report on this important life-saving legislation. Thank you. I'm available for questions.
Thank you. We'll wait for questions for a moment. Is Patrice Costa here?
She must have signed up someone and had her name mistakenly put in. Sorry about that.
No problem. Thank you, Delegate. Questions? Delegate Guyton?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Delegate Boyce, for bringing this bill back this year. I want to also thank Nurse Pat for your testimony and for your swift action to save someone's life. I do have a question for you. I also want to point out I'm going to do the same thing I did last year, which is hold up my inhaler. I had my first asthma attack in elementary school as well. Luckily, my school was 5 minutes from the emergency room in my town, which was very small. I don't believe most students are that close to emergency help. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you know how many students approximately have asthma or have their first asthma attack in the school setting?
I actually have that information from the, if you don't mind. They gave it to me actually last year when I asked for it. Give me 1 minute. Oh, sorry about that. It is not among my files. I do apologize for that. I can get that to you, but it is a significant amount. And they have it broken down per a child and an adult of asthma attacks, and most importantly, whether or not they then needed hospitalization. So I can send that to you with the committee. I'm sorry I didn't have that on here.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. May I just ask one more question? I know that the first year we instituted Narcan in schools, there were only 2 instances of usage of that, and they were both for adults. Do you believe that we would have more than 2 students who might use this inhaler in a year's period of time?
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Delegate. Next person we have signed up is favorable with amendment. It's George Tolley, who I was just looking up on Google, and I would ask Mr. Tolley if you're related to the George S. Tolley professor at the University of Chicago.
In fact, I'm not.
Aha.
I get that question more than you would think, but
Well, with the same middle initial as well.
oh, I know. I think it's just a coincidence. I was actually an economics major in college, and so my professors all asked me that question too. Anyway,
Gotcha.
I'm sorry, and it's certainly not my intention to keep up your time with that. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is George Tolley, and I'm Legislative Chair for the Maryland Association for Justice here, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to present testimony favorable with amendments. Get to the point. The amendment that we wanted to suggest gently and ask that the committee consider it favorably has to do with the immunity provision in the bill. It's part of current law, and it's because currently the health services that school nurses and other authorized school personnel can provide to children doesn't protect children with who are at risk for anaphylactic shock, or under this bill would not protect children with asthma the way that children with diabetes are protected from unreasonably unsafe conduct. I would contrast page 3, lines 27 through 31 of this bill with section, and I'll just get it first. I'm going to find it. I had it written and I've got my, well, there's a section in the education article that I believe this committee put in place, section 7-426.4, subsection D, which talks about the immunity from liability applicable to nurses and school personnel who treat and provide diabetes care to children who are in need of that in schools. The diabetic children are protected from unreasonably unsafe care, and we feel that that's important. Now, there are already in the law protections for school personnel, and I think I was here a couple of weeks ago talking about the protections that school boards of education have. There are limits on caps on liability damages, and those laws are all still in place. But if you expand, which certainly sounds, and Nurse Papp's testimony was dramatic and compelling, if you expand the available services for students, we ask that you do it in the way that you did for diabetic children to protect them from unreasonably unsafe care so that they can receive the care in a way that's safe. And if they don't lose their rights or their parents don't lose the rights to try to get compensation from the school boards of education, even though it's limited by the caps that apply. That's, I think, going to contribute to providing these children with care that is safe, that people will be doing what's reasonable under the circumstances, as certainly I would argue Nurse Papp did. She would be protected by the immunity in section 7-426.4 of the education article, every bit as much as she's currently protected for all the other things that she would have been allowed to do, like Narcan and so forth.
Mr. Tolley, your time has expired.
I thank you for this time and ask for, I'm happy to answer questions, ask for that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Tolley before we move on to the two opponents to the bill? Delegate Attara?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Tolley, I have a quick question. I'm looking at the bill and the fiscal note, and it's saying that except for any willful or grossly negligent act. So I know my son has asthma, and I would want, like, he has been in the hospital several times because of it. I wouldn't want a teacher to be worried that if they administer this, they can then be sued. I know you're saying there are some protections already, but what's wrong with the willful or grossly negligent standard that's in there?
Well, thank you, Delegate Attar, for that question. The willful and grossly negligent standard allows a child to be subjected to unreasonably unsafe conduct, and there would be nothing the child could do about it. The child's medical expenses subsequent to the discharge from the school to the hospital, and all of that would be entirely borne by the family and not at all by the school system, despite the fact that the conduct was objectively unreasonable under the circumstances. Requiring the family to prove that the school personnel, and it doesn't have to be a nurse under this bill, it could be any designated school personnel, acted in a way that was willfully, obviously they were trying to help. Obviously, it's hard to imagine how you could willfully act with willful misconduct and try to help a child who's experiencing an asthma attack. And so that standard that would be that currently children who experience anaphylactic shocks, they don't have that protection that children who require diabetes care do currently have under the law. This isn't something new. We're not asking you to do anything you haven't done before. We're asking for an amendment that protects children the same way other children with special medical needs are treated. And I would answer the question that way. I hope that does answer your question, Delegate.
It answers my question. I don't necessarily agree with it, but it answers my question. Thank you.
No, I understand. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Delegate. I'm going to move on to, we have Christy Gorman here. Ms. Gorman?
Hi. Thank you to the committee for allowing me to present my testimony. My name is Christy Gorman, and I'm the president of the Maryland Association of School Health Nurses, and I am also an elementary school nurse. It is our position that schools should stock albuterol inhalers for emergency use by the registered professional school nurse for students with known asthma who exhibit symptoms of respiratory distress, as specified in standing orders, protocols, established guidelines, and who are under care by a licensed healthcare practitioner. However, this bill raises serious safety concerns because the provisions also enable the administration of stock inhalers to students without an asthma diagnosis or a healthcare practitioner's order. The Global Initiative for Asthma no longer recommends starting with a short-acting inhaled bronchodilator only treatment for asthma. Instead, their guidance starts with a low-dose inhaled corticosteroid to reduce the risk of asthma-related exacerbations and death. Let's say there's a respiratory issue at school for an athletic event or a school club, and the PE teacher or a parent volunteer gives the inhaler and follow-up doesn't occur for a variety of reasons, like if the student walked home or was taken home by another family, or if the nurse wasn't notified for some reason, or the parent wasn't notified. The inhaler does act as a quick relief, but then there's a huge risk if the child goes home and doesn't have follow-up for their condition. Asthma attacks are worse at night, and by not calling parents and not referring students with asthma symptoms and who have no inhaler to a doctor, this increases the risk of a child having a severe asthma attack at night. At best, this child would end up in the ER instead of the pediatrician's office, but that's expensive and associated with a poor asthma control. At worst, treating a child with short-acting inhaled bronchodilator at school could set the child up for a fatal attack for untreated and worsening asthma. Best practices in asthma management require a child who has used a rescue inhaler twice in a week to see a primary care practitioner. How's the school going to handle this? On the third time, we don't give the inhaler, or we just keep treating the child with wildly inflamed lungs with a medicine that, again, sets the child up for a fatal attack at night. I asked a few teachers their comfort level of giving an inhaler to a student which they weren't sure if they had an asthma diagnosis or a doctor's order. Most of them said they'd call 911. Some of them weren't comfortable because they didn't know if they gave the inhaler the right way in an emergency situation. Most of them said they would feel comfortable giving the inhaler if a student had a doctor's order and they had a diagnosis of asthma, but some said they had concerns if they gave it wrong, or if the student didn't have asthma and it was something else like a heart condition or even COVID-19, and if the student wasn't seen by a doctor ready for follow-up. So with this being said, MASHN opposes House Bill 609, and we feel it's more appropriate that we put this in guidelines instead of something fixed in a statute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then
Chair.
Robin Elliott. Yes, Delegate Boyce.
I'm sorry. So I left it in the chat. My aide signed up someone wanted to testify, but it put her name instead of the witness's name, and they're still in the waiting room.
All right, well, we need to go to the next opposition. First, Robin Elliott.
Good afternoon, Robin Elliott. I'm here today on behalf of the Maryland Nurses Association and want to thank and acknowledge Delegate Boyce and the proponents. I think the Maryland Nurses Association and the school nurses all very much support stock inhalers. We would suggest a path forward is to work with the two state agencies, the Department of Health and the Maryland State Department of Education. I think the guidelines can address many of the issues that have been raised, and guidelines are much more flexible than statute to encompass all the clinical nuances. You've heard from the Maryland Nurses Association before on school health bills. Our concerns about the specific provisions of this bill are similar to others. We want to make sure that nurses remain in charge of determining which lay persons in the school are both trained and competent to administer medications. That's true in the case of inhalers as well. It definitely becomes more complicated, as Ms. Gorman raised, in the case where the child isn't diagnosed with asthma. We have also noted that there seems to be a little uncertainty and around stock inhalers from the CDC because of COVID. Right now, there's no data. They're still recommending using them, but they have quite an elaborate suggestions around sanitizing the stock inhalers. This just raises, it's a little bit uncertain. It gets more complicated when laypersons are involved. And we think the guidelines process really is the best place to work out all these nuances. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Elliott. We do have a question. First, Delegate Plakovich-Carr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is for either Ms. Gorman or Ms. Elliott. So I guess I'm just trying to understand, what the potential downside is if an asthma inhaler is given to a child who appears to be having an asthma attack. Maybe that wasn't the case. So I'll say, I'm coming from the perspective of my son actually has a very severe food allergy. And he was diagnosed when he was very young. And the first time he ever had a severe allergic reaction from eating this food, we called his doctor because we weren't sure, should we give the Auvi-Q, which is like an EpiPen. And the doctor said, even if you suspect he ate it, give it to him. There's no harm in going ahead and injecting him. The harm would be if you don't act. And so I'm trying to understand, isn't it comparable with asthma? I feel like earlier testimony indicated that, there is a real harm in not acting. So I'm trying to understand what the harm is by going ahead and administering the inhaler, even if it turns out later that wasn't quite the right course of treatment.
Sure. So as I had outlined in my testimony, some of the concerns are regarding the follow-up of the student if it's not appropriate. My daughter did have an asthma attack for the first time in an after-school event when she was 6 years old. And she had trouble breathing. She had retractions. Her eyes, she just looked sick and I didn't know what was wrong with her. Well, when I took her to the doctor, she actually had pneumonia. So if she were treated with an inhaler, which is very short acting, it would have given her that immediate relief. And let's say I wasn't a nurse and I wasn't quite sure what to do in these situations. And I'm like, oh, she looks good. We're just gonna go home, go to bed. Well, no, that could have been fatal then later on in a few hours because the bronchodilators are only short acting. They're not going to fix a problem. They're gonna treat an immediate problem. But with that EpiPen, that's going to fix and reverse that anaphylaxis. But then the EpiPen, you're calling 911 as soon as you're administering that. There's no provisions in here that state that our next steps are calling 911. But again, that should be more of a guideline instead of something in a statute. I hope that answered your question.
It does. I mean, I guess it still sounds to me like, I don't think we're disagreeing that, right, it's not a long-term course of action. And I feel like those other concerns are fixable in terms of notification provisions, perhaps in the bill. Thank you.
I was going to say the same thing, Delegate Plakovich-Carr. It seems like if that's what's necessary, that if an inhaler were used, that a parent were and/or guardian was immediately notified. Delegate Feldmark.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my question also is for either Ms. Gorman or Ms. Elliott. I guess getting to the issue that was raised earlier about immunity and sort of narrowing that and the comparison to the immunity for administering treatment to a diabetic student. And I just wanted to get sort of from a medical perspective, do you see a distinction between treatment you would administer to a student with diabetes versus use of an inhaler or, an EpiPen or some other treatment? Like, is there a difference in the treatment that makes sense for a different level of immunity, or is that simply they got drafted differently?
Both. So for a student with diabetes, we have that diagnosis of diabetes. They have a care plan that's in place for their diabetes. And if they're having, if there's hyperglycemia or too high blood sugar, or if it's too low of blood sugar, and you're going to give a medication that's a rescue medication like glucagon, or if it's going to be just more insulin in that case. We have established procedures already in place, and we know that child is under care specifically for that condition that they have. I'm concerned, and the teachers that I spoke to are concerned in a statute like this, that they wouldn't be protected if they gave this inhaler to a student and then they went home a couple hours later and it made it worse, like their condition became worse because they weren't treated, because it looked like they were fine after they were treated. Or if they went home after school to a friend's house or something, or if they were even had something different, like they were choking on something, or a younger child or a different child had like aspiration, that could mask itself as shortness of breath and chest tightness, anxiety, panic attacks. All of these things are different. And if you give an inhaler to somebody who has a panic attack, that's actually going to increase their heart rate and make it worse. And now let's add the mask component to it. They're now not getting enough oxygen in. So there's a few different examples I can think of.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, gonna go back to make sure I get the name correctly from Christy Sadrelli.
Hi, my name is Dr. Christy Sadrelli. Thanks for having me today. I'm a pediatric pulmonologist at Johns Hopkins. I'm an asthma specialist, and I take care of lots of kids with asthma. I'm here on my own behalf, not here to represent Johns Hopkins, but I'm really happy to speak with you all today, and I'm happy to answer any of the questions as well. So we all know asthma is really common. We've established that emergencies with asthma do happen at school. And unfortunately, despite this, 80% of children who need albuterol at school do not have it. And this problem affects all kinds of children. It doesn't matter if you're in private school, public school, rich, poor, where you live in the state. Kids forget their medicine, they use it up, it expires, they lock it in a locker, or they haven't had asthma before and their first episode is at school. A very common situation in our state and all over the country is that the school, sometimes despite their best efforts, does not have the proper documentation and or medication for that specific student. Sometimes the school nurse is there and knows the patient has asthma and they still are unable to treat. When children don't have their medication, schools have few options, and in many cases, they have to call 911. This leads to worsening of symptoms, ambulance transports, lost school time, and emergency department visits. And it places children at risk. I mean, in worst case, of course, they could die at school. There is a simple and low-cost solution. It's stock albuterol inhalers. I disagree with any statement that we should avoid treating emergencies with asthma in school because they need to get better care. I totally agree they need to get better care. And I don't believe through all my years as an asthma specialist that kids who have that severe asthma they're not that much helped by one treatment of albuterol. If they keep getting it, they're gonna get sicker and they're gonna need to see a doctor. Likewise, treating another diagnosis such as pneumonia with albuterol either won't help at all, or if it helps a little because maybe they have asthma and pneumonia, it's not going to take care of the problem. So for me, there's really no downside to accidentally giving this to the wrong child once in a while. And in fact, this is a crucial part of the law for me and what the states with the best laws have done. They have included it for children in respiratory distress. I mean, in a perfect world, we would know who has asthma, we would have it documented, but that's just not the reality we're in. And this is a practical law. Albuterol has very few downsides. It's very safe to give. So it would not be so dangerous if we made the wrong call. And likewise, this usually trains a couple designated people at school to give it. It's not for all teachers to have to give, it's not that broad. I work nationally with a group of experts who are doing this all over the country, and I'm part of a working group too, so I'm happy to answer questions. I just want to say too that I would love for Maryland to join the 14 states who have already passed this legislation, and I think now more than ever, we're so focused on a healthy breathing environment, school environment, safe place for lungs in schools, and COVID has made us think about it. So to me, stock albuterol is part of that. Thank you for considering.
Thank you, Doctor. Any questions for Dr. Sadramelli? All right, thank you so much, Delegate Boyce. Thank you for everyone who signed up to testify today. We're done with the hearing on House Bill 609. To the members,
Thank you so much.
The next bill on the list has 18 people signed up. So we're going to take Delegate Morgan's bill, House Bill 526, which is sponsor only first, and then we will switch back to House Bill 629. Delegate Morgan?
Hey, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My internet's going in and out today. It's been a little bit of a challenge, but I'm here, I think for now, to pitch to you. HB 526 is the local delegation bill. It prohibits minors from smoking on school grounds. We've been having a slight problem in St. Mary's County with children smoking cigarettes and vaping, and we wanted some type of tool to enhance with our enforcement. This allows the administration to go ahead and I guess write the children a citation. We do have an amendment for this bill that takes out all the penalties towards that, though, and so basically it leaves us with a sentencing a minor to a tobacco cessation program, or on a second offense, up to 4 hours of community service. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Hey, Delegate, we do have a question for you from Delegate Guyton.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate. I do have a question because I'm a little confused. I appreciate the reasoning behind bringing this bill because I don't want kids to smoke, certainly not at school. But didn't the General Assembly pass a bill that say you can't smoke until you're 21 anyway? So aren't there already penalties in place for that?
I believe you're right. I mean, that was the legislation from going from memory from a couple years ago. This was brought to us by our school superintendent, who's saying they're having, some issues. And I believe it requires the school administration to be able to, the school administration shall notify the parent, guardian, or minor of a scheduling conflict that the minor may attend. So I believe it allows the school administration to notify the parent and put, that the child should be in a smoking cessation class. I'm not sure what the current state law is, or if police need to be involved or something like that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
We do have a question from Delegate Barnes.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And I just wanted to piggyback off of Delegate Guyton's question. Being that there is a state law that takes folks to be 21 before they can start smoking, wouldn't this, the bill that you're introducing, be somewhat redundant?
Well, it might be redundant, but I'm not really sure what the enforcement mechanism is on. I'm going back from memory on what current state law is. I'm not sure what the enforcement mechanism is. I want to recall that we passed that a couple years ago. I want to say that it was something where it was only enforced on businesses. I'm not really sure if the person actually, doing the smoking if there's any enforcement mechanism at all. And I'm not sure who does the enforcement, if it's actually law officers or something of other.
No, I understand. It's something that I guess the committee could take up. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. And we do have 3 people here from Economic Matters. Next question, Delegate Queen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair, sorry. Question for the sponsor. So you're asking about enforcement, but you took out all of the enforcement items out of the amendment. So let me finish the question. So is the goal now just to ensure that students are enrolled in this cessation class?
Yeah, I believe that's the goal. The bill
Right.
originally came in with like a $50 fine. I believe these amendments came from the Senate version of this. Came into my office yesterday. So basically, on the amendment, they stripped out all the financial fines, and it's may. Yeah, on the first offense, it's a shall attend a tobacco cessation program, and on the second one, it's a shall attend or may be required to do no more than 4 hours of community service.
And so it's your belief that the schools can't do that without this legislation?
The schools are the ones asking for the bill. So.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Delegate Ivy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate, for bringing the bill. So I look at this issue and I see that you've already taken the enforcement piece out of the legislation, which is a good start. My concern is that we've been seeing so many different iterations where officers stop students and arrest them for things that have nothing to do with smoking cigarettes specifically. And I guess my question is, are you concerned that, there may be unintended consequences and additional arrests that come from this piece of legislation being put forward?
No, not at all, because I think the goal of this legislation is to empower the school administration, not the SROs or the police officers. So judging by the amendment, it says the school administration shall notify the parents, the school administration, not the SROs, not law enforcement or anything like that. And, going back and piggybacking off of some of the other questions that have already been asked, I think that's a major difference between maybe the bill that we passed a couple of years ago, dealing with the enforcement piece of, not being allowed to smoke under the age of 21.
Sure.
I'm not really sure I remember what the enforcement piece on this, but this enables the school administration.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Delegate Morgan? All right, thank you, Delegate Morgan, and thank you to Delegates Howard, Queen, and Wilson for joining us from Economic Matters. We'll now go back to House Bill 629, Delegate Novotny. Welcome back.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Good afternoon, distinguished members of the Ways and Means Committee. For the record, my name is Delegate Reed Novotny, representing District 9A, covering parts of Carroll and Howard counties. Chair Kaiser and Vice Chair Washington, thank you so much for your time today, and I promise to make my portion of this short. I will start with the fact that the policy review exposed a drafting flaw that has now been corrected via an amendment today. From the Supreme Court to our great Maryland House of Delegates, decisions are made by governing bodies to enhance the communities they serve. This is done through many different governing rules, but all that I have researched have an odd number of members or a fail-safe in the event of a tie, except for our Maryland school boards. 7 counties school boards have voting members, which create this unique even gridlock problem. Anne Arundel, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Hartford, Howard, Montgomery, and Prince George's all have even voting members. The other 17 counties have elected not to give their student members voting rights. These counties also share in common the fact that they have an odd number of members on their school board, just like our House of Delegates. The intent of this bill is not to eliminate the student member of the board's right to cast a vote in the 7 counties who have authorized it, only to clean up the unintended consequence of adding additional gridlock by creating a fail-safe in the event of a tie. That is it. As amended, the bill is 51 words and the intent is simple and the bill is simple. I would urge you to move favorably on this bill and I stand ready to answer any questions you may have for me. Thank you for your time.
Delegate Novotny, I do have 2 questions.
Yes, ma'am.
If you've clarified that this bill is only to get rid of the voting rights of the student member when there is a tie, in effect, that means then that the voting members vote why not just eliminate it altogether?
Yes, ma'am. Great question.
That seems to be what you're doing here.
No, ma'am, not at all. So for example, PG County has 14 members. So there's actually 15 permutations of votes that can happen. The student member in PG County would be able to vote 93% of the time. They would only not have their vote counted if there was a direct 7-7 tie. So all of our counties, except for Anne Arundel, limit what the student member can do, as you know. This is only changing that one.
Are you saying, could they break a tie?
They can't make a tie.
They can't make it, but I'm asking, could they break the tie?
Yes, ma'am. And the way it's written, it would be it would not be a tie. It would not be a 7-7, 4-4, and the like. They would be part of the majority.
Well, I just want to clarify. If an adult member is absent and it's otherwise 7-7, you're not against the student member breaking the tie.
I am not against that at all. If the quorum allows it, the whole point of this bill is to get rid of the gridlock, not necessarily get rid of the student member's vote.
Okay, and then my next question, you mentioned the 7 jurisdictions that have the odd number where the student, you're arguing that the student makes the tie when one could argue that it's any of the members that make the tie. Have you spoken to any of those 7 jurisdictions about their desire on this bill?
I have off the record, and they did not want to share their personal opinions on, it wasn't an official inquiry, if we put it that way. And you're correct.
So officially none of those 7 counties have asked for this? Is that correct?
Members of the community have asked me to come forward with this bill, yes, but not the school boards themselves.
Members from all seven jurisdictions have?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so I'm just trying to understand. I sense that this is a problem maybe drawing from one of the 2 counties you might represent, or one county, and I'm just trying to understand why you are taking this effort in terms of local control from the other jurisdictions that have advocated on behalf of their own student member, even knowing that they had an odd number beforehand.
Is that a question at the end?
It is. I'm asking why you're looking at those 7 jurisdictions with odd numbers who have who have wanted student members, and why you're trying to undo that without asking them if they wanted that as well.
Ma'am, only to get rid of the gridlock that it's created. And I know there are many examples in Howard County specifically, and there are other times in which there is a tie vote. And it's just a good government piece of legislation, in my opinion.
I understand. I'm just saying there's many jurisdictions that have made this determination on their own. Next question we have is Delegate Ebersol.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Novotny, do you know the makeup of the State Board of Education?
I am not familiar. Go ahead.
Okay, well, it has a student member that votes. It also has, in a similar way to the way student members are often elected, a teacher that is elected from among the teachers in the state. That model exists because those are stakeholder groups. And so wondering if when you say that the student creates the tie, I would argue that all the people who voted on both sides created the tie. And I'm curious why the students' vote counts less. It would be akin to us doing this in the legislature. We have a tie on a vote in committee, and we take the most junior member of the committee and say, well, your vote created the tie. We don't think that you're quite ready to vote. Is that what you're shooting? Is that generally what your opinion is here?
Absolutely not. If you had a better idea of how to not have a gridlock, it's been suggested to me that maybe the school superintendent could be the tiebreaker.
I don't think you're answering my question. I'm not talking about gridlock. I'm asking you how you're treating the students' vote. Do you think of it as a lesser vote than the other votes because that's the one that created the tie?
So I was going to answer the question.
Okay, thank you.
I do not believe that they have a lesser vote based on the fact that certain counties have given them the right to vote. For example, our county and Howard County gives them the right to vote. They also limit their right. So only one county, we actually have 96% of our counties in all of Maryland have limited the student member vote. So have the 96% of the counties out there done something irrational, illogical? Only one county allows them to vote on every single issue. This is just a slight change And I would be open for any other suggestions on how we get not to have a gridlock of 4-4 also.
All right, thank you. Next question, Delegate Patterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Novotny, with this bill, let me just have full disclosure. I'm a former member and chair of a Charles County Board of Education. And so when looking at the legislation, and I know that statewide you're proposing, we encourage students to participate and to vote so that their voices are heard. I know that many of the students are concerned about your vote. And so on their behalf, why do you feel the bill is justified in what I view as nullifying their vote and their opinions? Because we want their opinions in making decisions about their education and their facilities. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I really do appreciate that question. So for example, in most counties, they elect the student member from students as old as 11 to about 18, which is about 12% of our body of Maryland, right? Of the population of Maryland, about 12%. 75% of our voting members are able to vote. So all the members of the residents of Maryland who are over that age. Those 75% of Marylanders who are over the age of 18 who can vote in school board elections do not have the ability to vote for that student member. So my retort and my question back is, when that student member has no ability to be either reelected, like all the student board school board members, how do the 75% of Marylanders have a redress on that affected or that politically elected or elected member of the student board?
Was that a question for me?
Yes, ma'am.
Because
we don't, Delegate Patterson, okay. No one gets to ask us the questions, you know that. But we could say to Mr. Novotny again, Delegate Novotny, that again, the school boards jurisdictions have made these decisions already. And that, yes, student members have been reelected. So please check the record on that. Delegate Guyton, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Delegate Novotny. Welcome to the General Assembly. I also have full disclosure. I served on the Maryland State Board of Education with a student member, and of that group, I don't know if you're aware, all of the members are appointed until this past year where we started electing teachers, except for that actual student board on the Board of Education. And my question to you is whether you have actually worked with a student member of a board, because I have always found them to be incredibly thoughtful and helpful in our deliberations. I do hope you stick around, because the next hearing you're going to hear from several of the student members of our boards of education.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for the question. I actually do not know, and this is a good point, I do not know our, say, Howard County's student member, because this is not an attack on the student member. This is, why would we set up an institution with an even amount with no fail-safe to get past that gridlock? That's it. Never met them before. I don't know who they are. I don't have a personal vendetta against them. I just know that 4 + 4 = gridlock, in my opinion.
Delegate Novotny, does your Board of Education have a meeting with your delegation every year before session starts? I know maybe you're new, if somebody else could answer that question.
We do, Madam
The
Chair.
answer is yes, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Howard County Board of Education does.
Because that's a meeting we have every year. And again, ever since we first gave our SMOB voting rights back in 1979 and expanded it over since that time, never have they come back to ask us for legislation to deal with that. And so that is 42 years of history since our first student member on the board. So Delegate Feldmark with a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Delegate Novotny. And you mentioned you haven't had a chance to get to know our student member. I would encourage you to. He's phenomenal. I think that would be a good idea. I just want to follow up and clarify my understanding. I believe you've said your intent here is not to devalue the student voice on the board, but simply to clear up what you're referring to as gridlock, the potential for a tie. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So would you be open to clearing up that potential for a tie by adding a second voting student member?
Ma'am, I would be open to discussing that, not only with the local delegation, but all of the delegations. I, again, have no issue, and I've said in public testimony, I actually was the junior mayor of my town when I was 17. And I love that ability. Was not necessarily a voting member, but I value their input, and I don't have a problem with their input. I think that would solve this problem also.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Buckle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Novotny, I got to tell you, before I came to the House of Delegates, I spent very little time thinking anything about boards of education and how they operate. I think I sued a board of education once in a tort case, and that's the only time I thought about them before I ever came here. But one thing that has been interesting to me in my 7 years in this committee is this wide, divergent way that every county seems to do, almost every county. There seems to be 4, 5, 6 different models of electeds, appointeds, hybrids, student voting, non-voting. And so I just want to confirm, I think Madam Chair may have said it, I caught it hopefully on the Zoom, you may have said it, in the vast majority of counties, at least, the larger counties seem to all have this voting member, many of them do. But the vast majority of jurisdictions, boards of education in the state, they don't allow the student member to vote on anything. Is that right?
Correct, 17.
Okay. And then every other county, maybe I'm getting this wrong, every other county except for Howard?
No, except for Anne Arundel.
Okay. They allow, that has a voting member, restricts their voting rights in some ways. They don't let them vote on some issues or some types of resolution.
Negative personnel actions.
Personnel actions. Is there budgetary actions as well? There's
sometimes, yeah.
Some counties, they don't let them vote on the actual budget.
County by county, yes, you're correct, sir.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that your legislation sort of fits within what all of those other counties do, in the sense that you're not removing the student, you're not removing their ability to vote, you're just restricting it in certain limited circumstances? Is that fair?
You're exactly right. It actually only will really change one member, one person in Anne Arundel, to have them a little different, their ability to vote. The rest, the 6 other, change them a little bit, and the 17 other counties don't have a voting right at all at this point, so it doesn't change them at all.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
To follow Delegate Buckle's questioning, it sounds like he was suggesting that given that 6 of the 7 locals that give voting rights have some kind of limit, so this is just another limit. Who created those limits for those 6 counties?
I'm sorry, ma'am. It is all local. It is all by the county. Yes.
Oh, so each county made their own limitations. Okay, I was just trying to clarify from Delegate Buckle's question.
Yes, ma'am. You're right.
Delegate Shoemaker?
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair. Delegate Novotny, Maryland's a little bit schizophrenic in what it allows young folks to do. I mean, we just heard from the last bill that now you can't even smoke a cigarette legally in the state of Maryland until you're 21 years old. And yet some jurisdictions entrust the student members of the board to vote on policies, and in some cases even budgetary decisions that affect, thousands of students. But your bill doesn't, as Delegate Buckle alluded to, I think in his questioning, it doesn't divest any member of a board of their voting privileges to the extent they have them, right?
Correct.
Okay, and all you're saying is in an isolated incident where there's a tie, the student member of the board's vote wouldn't be counted in that one particular instance, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Delegate Eversole?
Madam Chair,
So we have a little false equivalence going here. We're talking about what they may vote on or how a certain kind of a vote is out on any issue. So I don't think we're talking about the same thing, but I have a logistic question. Baltimore County, for example, has 12 members, and we're talking about breaking a log jam, but actually the bylaws say that you have to have a constitutional majority. That would be 7 of 12. If you're unwilling to count this vote, wouldn't that be 7 of 11 then suddenly in that situation if a tie appears?
That was actually the flaw that was found during bill drafting, and it actually changes that denominator and the numerator. So I believe it would fall in line with all the counties.
This is an amendment you're offering?
Yes, it was actually drafted up and hopefully distributed. I got a copy, I know, beforehand, but maybe it was only like an hour ago, so I apologize.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Delegate Novotny? All right, seeing none, we will move on to the those people who are signed up to testify. We have 2 proponents, 1 favorable with amendment, and then 15 opponents. So I think we've taken a lot of time asking questions of Delegate Novotny. If we can move forward. Next, we have Drake Smith to testify. Is Mr. Smith here? Well, let's next have Lisa Feinberg, who I did see here earlier.
Thank you very much. I am Lisa Feinberg, and I'm testifying in support of HB 629. Thank you very much, all of you, for your great public service and for hearing my testimony today. I'm a longtime resident of Howard County, and my background as pertains to today's bill is that I have spent many hours volunteering in the public schools, especially in the capacity of PTA president at the elementary level, middle school level, and 4 years as PTSA president at the high school level. I also have served as campaign manager for a successful Board of Education race, so I do understand the system. More importantly, 2 former student members of the Board of Education are from my neighborhood. I'm good friends with their family. I watched them grow up, and I watched them serve on the Howard County Board of Education as the student members. So last night, I called both student members and had lengthy conversations with them. Both former student members expressed very similar thoughts and opinions on this bill. I must say they are not in support of this bill, to be honest. They felt that their vote was equal in weight to the adult school board members, although perhaps recorded last in the voting process. And they remarked that they did not consider themselves, quote, the deciding vote. So this goes back to what Delegate Ebersol, I think, is alluding to. I recognize that there are positives and negatives to both supporting or not supporting this bill. And I want to thank you very much for taking my testimony today. And I'm very thankful for our excellent legislative system, and that I and other people have the opportunity to weigh in and have a small part of this process. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Is Drake Smith here? Trying one more time.
Chairwoman, I just spoke to Drake. He is my student representative. This is Delegate Jones. I apologize. He's having trouble logging in, but he's trying to. Could we potentially go to the next?
Of course. All right.
Thank you. We'll work it out.
Okay. Ms. Feinberg was the only one who signed up favorable other than Drake Smith. So we'll take questions and then go to the favorable with amendment. Any questions for Ms. Feinberg? All right. Thank you so much. We'll next go to Tracy Spiegel, signed up favorable with amendment.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi.
Good afternoon, and thank you very kindly for your time. My name is Tracy Spiegel. I'm a Maryland business owner and a proud parent of 2 Howard County students. I am in support of Mr. Novotny's bill, particularly relative to the word gridlock. I have been watching, because it's my county, I've been watching Howard County's Board of Education meetings very closely since September, obviously due to the pandemic. And I have been very surprised, because I've served on different boards, that almost every meeting between September through November has had 4-4 gridlock votes. And no matter where you fall on a particular issue, the fact that the board has an even number of members seemed questionable to me in a functioning governing body. As I further started watching them, I noticed that there is a student member. I'm in full support of a student member. I was part of my public schools governing body. I hope my kids one day want to be a student member. But the 7 adults, so for Howard County, there's 8 members. The 7 adults are elected by adult registered voters in the state of Maryland. And as stated here earlier, the student is elected by 11-year-olds through 17-year-olds. So I do question the weight, whether the votes should carry the same weight. But I more posit the question if a minor should have a vote of equal weight on major issues. You all talked about restrictions, and our county clearly restricts budget, personnel, and redistricting for the student member. And it feels common sense to me that the reopening plans for schools should fall under those restrictions. But again, that's getting into the larger issue of what are we restricting by county? The 8 board member is really questionable to me. So I hope this assembly of very wonderful, dedicated people can come up with either restrictions or legislation to amend this. I had a mathematician friend who works at NSA do the math for me. And when there are 8 voting members for any motion, 33% of motions can pass. When there are 7 members, 50% can pass. So I feel like Mr. Novotny's bill of mentioning gridlock very much hits the nail on the head, that motions are unable to pass and gridlock is causing problems, particularly during this pandemic. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Spiegel? All right, thank you. Drake Smith, is Drake in yet? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm here.
Drake, and are you assigned to, you're signed up in favor of the bill?
No, I don't know what happened. I signed up and it said, the slots were filled, Zoom glitches, but I am not in favor of the bill.
Well, we're gonna have to save you to the end here because of the others who've signed up unfavorable. So please wait until we get to it. There is a block on the number of people who can testify on a certain side. So let's see how many people are here already. We'll start next with Mr. Jesse Harris.
Hello, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I do apologize that I'm in the car. But hello, thank you, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and esteemed members of the Ways and Means Committee for this opportunity to testify. My name is Jesse Harris Jr., a current high school senior, Chief of Staff for the Maryland Association of Student Councils, and a member of the Maryland Youth Advisory Council. Thank you all for providing me this opportunity to testify. House Bill 629 is a direct attack on the student voice, plain and simple. At a time where student input is arguably more valuable than ever, this bill seeks to limit the voting powers of all student members on county boards of education. For decades, we students have been fighting for our seat at the table. Fortunately, we've had the opportunity to have our voices heard through student members on boards of education statewide. However, not all student members on boards of education have voting powers. In fact, we've been advocating to expand voting rights for student members on boards of education for decades. The bottom line is that if students do not have voting powers, our voices will The bottom line is that if students do not have voting powers, our voices will likely be ignored. Students are the largest stakeholders within the education system. However, our voices are systemically suppressed by those in power. This bill aims to disenfranchise student members on boards of education in situations in which they would be the tie-breaking vote. This bill is stating that the student voice should essentially be overlooked when voting on matters in which there's a tie between adult board members. This is what I believe to be Delegate Navanti's first bill. The first bill he's introducing as a delegate in the House is a direct attack on the student voice. In the middle of a pandemic, during a time in which we, the students, are overwhelmed with virtual learning, mental health and wellness, the loss in our families, and more, the delegate is attacking our already limited voice. Additionally, it's 3:45 on a Friday. We have school and so many other commitments. Had I, as well as other student leaders, not been available today to have our voices heard, we could have easily been overlooked. Luckily, we're here and we want to make it clear that the passage of this bill would be a preemptive attack on our advocacy efforts to expand voting rights to student members on boards of education statewide. The worst of the education-related effects from the COVID-19 pandemic are yet to come. It's imperative that students' voices are being heard in rooms where decisions are being made to address these effects. I hope you all understand the value of the student voice and the importance of empowering students. I respectfully ask that you all oppose the passage of House Bill 629. Thank you all again for your time, and I yield the rest of my time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Harris. Next, we have Noreen Bowdwy.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the committee. My name is Noreen Bowdwy, and I'm here today to voice my unequivocal opposition to House Bill 629, and I believe I'm in good company. It is my understanding that the Teachers Union, Strong Schools Maryland, ACY, coalitions including the ACLU of Maryland, about a dozen other organizations oppose this bill. I've yet to hear of comparable support on the other side of this debate. Maryland is nationally regarded not just for its strong education system, but for the groundbreaking and effective inclusion of the student voice, of which research has shown has led to better education policy overall. Moreover, Maryland has led in student member of the board voting rights nationally for half a century. All of Maryland students are represented by a voting student member on the state level, and 3 in 4 out of Maryland's total students are represented by a voting student member on the local level, regardless of the amount of counties that have voting rights. So 3 in 4 of Maryland students have a local student member of the board. This bill in that regard would strip nearly 700,000 students of the sole advocate they have on their local school board that knows exactly what it's like to walk in their shoes, leaving student member voting rights meaningless and their positions essentially powerless. We all see the writing on the wall with this bill, and this is more than just a gridlock. This bill is taking a 50-year practice, abolishing it because of a short-term problem related to politics in individual counties, and in my view, it is indeed an attack on students. If it wasn't, then why single out the student member? Usually folks will argue that students should not be able to vote because of their age, and not only is it unavailing, it is insulting to suggest that on the basis of age alone or their disposition as a student, that they are thereby inept to be able to make informed decisions, research policies before the board, and take votes in the best interest of the students they represent and of the taxpayers and residents of their respective jurisdictions. It is my view that this gridlock issue is a red herring. Not too long ago, I had to cast these types of votes as well. I was appointed by the governor and served as a student member of the Maryland State Board of Education during ESSA implementation, the Kerwin Commission, and what everyone regarded was the state education session. I served on the state board when the pandemic started. I even voted on a $7 billion education budget before I turned 17. And to this day, I guarantee you that being above the legal age to buy a lottery ticket has no bearing on your ability to make an informed vote, be a strong advocate, and be a good board member. Students are the largest stakeholder in education, the most important stakeholder in education, and simultaneously the most marginalized. To strip the students of the sole board member they have that walks the same halls they do, and the only board member with a direct and comprehensive understanding of the true reality of Maryland schools would be a disservice to the state. I urge this committee to pass an unfavorable report of this bill, instead focus efforts on issues of educational equity during the pandemic, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions the committee has. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ms. Bowdwy, and maybe you know this, but 20 years ago, the student member on the Board of Education in Baltimore County was a young John Olszewski Jr.
Yes, 2000 to 2001. We have a lot of really great former student members of the board, so they've done
things. Next person to testify is Anthony Arend.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Anthony Arend, and I am a professor at Georgetown University and chair of the Department of Government, but I obviously speak in my personal capacity. I was the first voting student member on the Anne Arundel County Board of Education in 1975 and 76. The bill that set up that position was a bipartisan bill introduced by delegates Mike Wagner and Bob Neal, who is still around in state government. The purpose of that bill was to create a unique voice in the educational process. Students see a part of education that no other member sees. They see education at its best, at its worst. They see the realities of education in the classroom every day behind a desk. When I testified before Governor Marvin Mandel, one thing I noted was that student members on the board are not student representatives. That's what we have student government for. Rather, they are there because of this unique insight, because of this unique voice. Student members, like all members of the board, must represent all stakeholders in the county or as appropriate in the state. I oppose this legislation for a couple of reasons. The first was, and I was about to say, it lacks a clear legal standard. Now, my understanding from what Delegate Novotny just mentioned is that it's been amended. And so needless to say, I haven't seen the amended version of the bill, but I would still wonder if it has an operational legislative standard that could actually be implemented. But the more important reason that I oppose the bill is this. It seeks to limit the student voice. And this is a voice which makes for sound educational policy. I know not that just in what I have seen over these past 45 years, but in personal experience of having been on the Anne Arundel County Board of Education. I would be happy to answer any questions either about my service on the board or about this legislation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Arend. We next have Ian Hurd.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the committee. My name is Ian Hurd, and I serve as the chairman for the Maryland Youth Advisory Council. I also serve as the student member on the Charles County Board of Education. Before I begin my remarks, I also wanted to thank my delegate, Delegate Patterson, for her service to education and support of students. The Maryland Youth Advisory Council stands in strong opposition to House Bill 629. The Maryland Youth Advisory Council, established in 2008 to advocate for youth legislative priorities, has seen time and time again the value and expertise student members bring to their boards. It's not a coincidence that the Maryland Youth Advisory Council often has student members who serve on it. Maryland student members are extremely dedicated and involved in public policy throughout the state. The Maryland Youth Advisory Council has seen many instances where student members provide unique policymaking insight to craft the results of careful deliberation to not just fit the vision of an adult board, but the needs of a student population. Stripping the state's student members of their deciding vote would turn an incredible hallmark of Maryland's democratic institutions into a vote of vanity. Students have a voice and opinion on every issue, but it's the responsibility of our democratic institutions to honor that voice. Maryland honors the voices of our students, and today you have the opportunity to affirm that honor. The Maryland Youth Advisory Council respectfully urges an unfavorable report on House Bill 629. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. We just had 4 people testify. Before I turn to the next page, and again to members, we have another dozen or so people testifying. Are there any questions from the 4 people who just testified? All right, thank you all very much. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you especially to Mr. Arend for having the first student board member. I always like having the first one from my own county, but even better, first one in the state. Next, we have signed up Jonathan DePietro.
I'd like to start off by thanking Chair Kaiser and then Howard County delegates Ebersol and Feldmark for their line of questioning at the beginning of this discussion. It was absolutely the questions that we as students have been asking for a while now. Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the committee, my name is Jonathan DePietro. I am a current high school senior and chair of the Legislative Affairs Committee of the Howard County Association of Student Councils. Today, I'm providing testimony in opposition to House Bill 629. Throughout their tenure, the student members have served with dignity to discharge their responsibilities. Along with being a full-time board member, they must concurrently balance academics and manage personal and extracurricular activities. Maryland schools are exponentially growing, and with changing dynamics in education, student representation is even more critical. Students are the motivation behind all educational decisions, and their voices must be taken seriously throughout the policymaking process. As such, the student member of the board or other equivalent must be able to provide input from the voice of students and have a binding vote to ensure the school system continues to be responsive to students' needs and opinions. The student member vote solidifies the board's responsibility to act in the students' interest, those who are most directly affected by board decisions. House Bill 629 was drafted as a response to a single contentious matter in a single local jurisdiction. If passed, the bill will shred the only form of representation students have and will inevitably result in a chilling effect on students' voices. Regardless of the issue at hand, if student members' vote only counts when they agree with the majority of the adult board members, by this logic, their vote on the board is wholly discarded. This bill takes away the sole vote that reflects the climate of student opinion and entirely undermines the student members' role and responsibility, entirely demeans the voice of students they represent, and is a pure assault on Maryland's democratic institutions. At a course when civic engagement and listening to the youth is more important than at any point in our nation's history, this bill denies real influence for students and discourages engagement in the part of our state and local government that most impacts their day-to-day lives, their school system. An elected representative without a vote on critical issues cannot effectively represent their constituents. This bill is not an attack on the voting privileges of the student members. It is an attack on the voice of the over 800,000 students of Maryland. For these reasons, I urge the committee to issue an unfavorable report to House Bill 629. Thank you, and I respectfully yield back.
Thank you. We next have Driti Vadlakanda. Sorry if I haven't pronounced your name correctly.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and distinguished members of the committee for inviting me to testify before you today. My name is Driti Vadlakanda. As a finalist for the Maryland student member on the Board of Education position, as well as a Howard County student, I am especially concerned about the present challenge against the voting rights of our student members. The student members' voting rights have always been symbolic of the power of student voice. The right to vote enables student members to serve as strong and unyielding supports to our students, to guarantee them that they have a definite stake in their education, and to simply say, I got your back on this. House Bill 629 serves a crushing blow to not only our student members, but also to the thousands of students that they represent. Your vote counts, as long as most of the adults are already voting in one particular way. Your vote counts, as long as your say doesn't become problematic for us. You matter until you don't. Why pin the gridlock? Why pin the tie on the student member? The student voice is not inferior to any other stakeholder's voice in our education. The largest stakeholder, in fact, is the student. Without the student, there is no education system. With the knowledge that our student members cannot have a deciding vote on education matters that concern us every day, we students feel less motivated to be actively involved in our education. As a potential student member representing all Maryland students, I want to be able to guarantee my constituents that their concerns will be represented, will be respected, and will not be taken lightly due to a potential gridlock. We must assure the future of our nation that we're doing all that we can to support them in their educational journeys. We must empower the role of student voice in our schools. We must support the student member on the Board of Education. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take the next person signed up, Sophia Rashkovan.
Yep, that's me. Hi, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the committee. I'm testifying today in opposition of House Bill 629. My name is Sanya Rashwan. I'm a sophomore, but more importantly, I'm a student activist and leader in Montgomery County, and I'm a proud member of MASC. I moved to the US in 7th grade, and one of my first vivid memories was when my homeroom teacher showed us an announcement video from Matt Post, MCPS mob at the time. I was blown away by the fact that a student who walks the same MCPS hallways as I do was on the Board of Education. Now, there are 3 reasons it's absolutely unacceptable to prohibit the vote of a student member of County Board of Education from being the deciding vote on any matter. Important to note, this bill specifically targets student voice, student participation, and student member of boards of education. First, SMOBs are essential for promoting civic engagement. At the same end of 7th grade, I was for the first time voted in SMOB elections. That was the first time in my life when I had a chance to vote for an elected member to represent me. SMOB elections introduced me to the whole concept of voting. And when researching candidates, Ananya Tadikonda's promotion video introduced me to MCR and MASC, which I'm heavily involved with now. Student representation on the Board of Education promotes student activism and civic engagement by showing that we actually have power to influence our education. And I hope that delegates don't want to promote that our rights as voters, putting faith into an elected member, can be limited just because adults don't want our voices to be deciding. Next, they know the ins and outs of their school district from their own experience as students. SMOBs are not only elected officials, but also fellow students of mine. They walk the same hallway, study the same curricula, and see the same problems as I do at my school. While late at night, they vote at the board meetings. Next morning, they wake up, put their school uniforms or sweatpants on, and they actually are affected immediately by what they have decided last time. Student opinion is absolutely crucial since students are the biggest stakeholders of any school system. By allowing SMOBs vote to count only when it's convenient to the adults, you're questioning the voices of all students in your counties. Lastly, and most importantly, me being on campaign teams or just voting is the way to voice the needs of students at my school and my friends across the county. SMOBs are not just individuals, they are the representation of the whole student body in their county. Even by considering to take away the partial voting rights, being the deciding vote as it stated in HB 629, you're not just taking voting rights from an individual, but questioning the voices of all students across Maryland. This bill is a sheer violation of student ability to civically engage and works to undermine decades' way for progress to empower students of voices of young leaders. I urge you to oppose House Bill 69. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, and we'll take one more person before another round of questions. Chris Ladard.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Christopher Ladard. I'm a current high school senior and president of the Howard County Association of Student Councils, as well as a resident of District 9. Today, I am providing testimony in opposition to House Bill 629. The vote, and therefore the voice, of the student member of the board position must be protected at all costs. Commonly abbreviated as the SMOB, the historical significance of a competent student leader elected through fair, democratic processes to directly influence policy cannot be lost in modern political quarrels. The bill in question serves to do just that. Moreover, it represents a rejection of an essential precedent that student participation over time is expanded and validated, not retracted and dismissed. As I'm sure many members of the committee are aware, not being able to cast a deciding vote on any board matters effectively means that the student member has no vote at all. They would only be able to have a voice in measures that would pass or fail anyway, rendering their opinion useless. In effect, the students would be silenced. As a longtime education advocate, I developed close connections with several SMOBs over the years in Howard County and across the state. We have fought hand in hand to expand student voice, create a just and equitable learning environment for everybody, and ensure that the business of every school system is student-centric. Any claims that these students are unequipped to handle the responsibilities of the position are ill-founded and neglect the shocking competence of my peers. Many of them are more knowledgeable on the pressing challenges in our education system than voting adults, and their expertise is often comparable to that of other board members that come from a variety of professional backgrounds. The SMOB is the only board member that experiences the day-to-day operations of the school system, making the SMOB a trustee for the will of the student body. They must weigh a variety of factors, not just raw student opinion, when formulating complex solutions for complex challenges. Without a meaningful student vote, a board of education is not politically beholden to creating a quality experience for students. They would be politically beholden to creating a quality experience for parents. And while those parents are by and large the financiers of the school system, suffice it to say, the public education system is not built around the advancement of parents. We're never going to fully agree on how our elected officials vote, but pinning the blame of decisive votes on student board members and attempting to strip away their voting powers is purely an assault on democracy. Despite the partisan and divisive nature of modern day politics, the solution to an unsatisfactory vote or even legislative gridlock is almost never the removal of an institution in its entirety. We must protect the right of student board members to vote on behalf of students in Maryland and across the country. For these reasons, I urge the committee to issue an unfavorable report on House Bill 629. Thank you for your time and attention.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ledard. Any questions for these four people who have just spoken? All right, thank you. 1 second, let me, the next person, Talu Wanimi Dapo Adeyemo.
Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and esteemed members of the Ways and Means Committee for this opportunity to testify before the committee. My name is Toluwanimi Dapo Adeyemo. I'm a student leader from Charles County and one of the state legislative affairs coordinators of the Maryland Association of Student Councils, and I oppose this bill. The opinions of Maryland students are invaluable when voting on legislation that pertains to them. To nullify the votes of student leaders on these kinds of bills is nothing short of counterintuitive. I believe this bill is not only a disservice to the students of Maryland, but in censorship of an indispensable demographic of Maryland citizens. Thank you. I yield the rest of my time.
I'd like to invite up the next person to testify, Oliver Song.
Hello, everyone. My name is Oliver Song, and I am a student at a local high school in Howard County. I am here to testify against the County Boards of Education student member voting bill. The school system is what raises the nation's children, what educates them on the basics of democracy, what should be filled with fun and joy. Instead, this bill is trying to restrict the only thing that gives us representation. What is democracy if the constituents do not have a voice in it? The single vote on the board is what represents all of the county's students. Democracy gives everyone a voice, regardless of age. If this vote is removed, even if it's in a case to prevent gridlocks, then it would shut out thousands of students across Maryland from having a say in their own education. It is also hypocritical to learn about democracy in government class, yet have reduced representation on the board. I can bet people are only concerned about this issue as the student member voted away they did not like. It is more important to work together in this tumultuous time than throw blame around as if it were a beanbag. There is a reason why there is a student member. Students should have a say regarding policies that directly impact them. There is no need for other people to put their hands in and turn the pot. If students truly cared about the issue at hand, they would organize and push for that specific policy. There is again no need for others to be involved. We should consider our children and our future children, how they would think knowing that someone is trying to restrict the only thing that gives them a voice. The parents may be concerned that not enough students care about the specific topic they care about. They may also be worried about the gridlock situation, and that is understandable. But why is the student member the first vote that is cut out when it's a gridlock? Why? Is it because it's viewed as the least important? For the sake of our democracy, please vote against this bill. More student members would solve the issue that parents are concerned about, and that doesn't require this bill to be passed. This fail-safe is intent on restricting student voices. For these reasons and more, I urge a negative report on House Bill 0629. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you. The next person we have signed up is Jason Wu. Is Jason here? I didn't see you on the list. Okay, seems like I was muted. Jason Wu, are you here? All right, I don't see you. And Delegate Rose, you keep missing every time I put the baby on camera. You missed it like 2 minutes ago. Next we have Carmeli Leal.
Hello, can you all hear me okay? Perfect. Good afternoon to Chair Kaiser and esteemed members of the Ways and Means Committee. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Carmeli Leal, a senior at Eastern Technical High School in Baltimore County, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Maryland Association of Student Councils as the president in opposition of House Bill 629. Our organization, affiliated with the Maryland State Department of Education, represents student councils from across our great state. This bill works against specifically the student members of county boards of education that serve as necessary, informed student voices. Since the position's genesis within Maryland in the mid-1970s with Dr. Arend, as we saw, has illuminated the collective student voice for nearly 50 years now. One of the most important ways in which that is done is through the vote of these integral members. Through my roles in student leadership and representation, I've had the privilege of interacting with and witnessing the work that the student members do for our local school systems each and every day. They manage their responsibility as high school students and their positions on their respective boards with the utmost eloquence. And there are few deeds that are a greater disservice to the students of Maryland than to restrict the voting rights of these students in any way. In fact, as you all know, students are exactly who the education systems are made for and who county boards of education are elected or appointed to serve. It is only common sense to include them within the decisions about themselves in all cases, especially in times such as these, where our generation is the only one that can relay what it's really like to obtain a Maryland public school education during a 21st century global pandemic. As we know, many board members and legislators have not been in school for many years and for some, several decades. Student representation is proven to be paramount to a successful education system and is how students embody good citizenship and maintain involvement in the institutions that directly impact them, their education, and subsequently their futures. In fact, here in the state of Maryland, we mandate civic education in our public schools. The Code of Maryland Regulations states the following under the requirements for social studies instructional programs. Students shall inquire with particular emphasis on civic reasoning in order to become informed, responsible citizens, engage in the political process, and contribute to society. It would be hypocritical for the state to legally require the aforementioned standards while simultaneously punishing students for acting on the democratic values that they were taught. The students of Maryland will not and cannot stand for this hypocrisy. Therefore, we unequivocally oppose this bill and we respectfully request that you do the same. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I've since learned that Jason Wu is not able to be here, so we won't go back to him. Are there any questions for the last three folks who have spoken? All right, seeing none, I will go to the last page, and there's just three names here. We'll start with Michelle Hall.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Hall, and I'm here today testifying on behalf of the Maryland Coalition to Reform School Discipline, which includes the ACLU, the Office of the Public Defender, the Public Justice Center, along with nearly 20 other organizations and individuals in opposition to House Bill 629, which seeks to stifle student voice and limit across the state the voting rights of student members of our county boards of education. Maryland has long been a leader in supporting student voice and civic engagement in shaping school policies on the local and statewide levels. Our General Assembly has repeatedly affirmed and expanded student voice through bipartisan support. Yet now, this reactionary bill seeks to roll back student voice and engagement, perhaps when it is most needed. Schools are for our students, and it is hypocritical to sideline student voice and agency on issues that directly impact them. It is shameful that this bill undermines student leaders' abilities to develop their own voices and advocate for themselves and their constituent peers. Whether on issues related to school discipline and policing, virtual learning, extended school years, or the many other issues that come before the Board of Education, we must remember that students are at the core. To remove them from the discussion would be a failure. I am proud and I have been so impressed by the many student leaders, past and present, who use their valuable voices to oppose this bill, and I urge all committee members to follow their lead. Thank you.
Thank you. We next have Lauren Raskin.
Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and members of the committee. My name is Lauren Raskin, a student of Montgomery County, resident of District 14, and finalist in this year's Maryland State SMOB election. I speak before you today in unequivocal opposition to House Bill 629, which seeks to significantly diminish the voting rights of student members of the Board of Education across the state. The principle to which this bill stands upon actively promotes the ideology that the voices of students are lesser so than the voices of their adult counterparts, that the concerns and opinions of both the student member of the board and the thousands to which they represent hold inferior standing to those who are not even directly affected. For you see, it is us students who walk the halls of our schools, not the adult members of the board. It is us students who sit in the classrooms, not the adult members of the board. And it is us students who would suffer the repercussions of potentially wrongfully made decisions made by adult members of the board, should our voices be overshadowed and unheard. The attempted nullification of our education system's largest stakeholders, the students, is an egregious proposition, and one that must be immediately disregarded by the committee for the current and future prosperity of our education system. I believe that every single individual in this hearing today is in agreement that we have an ethical obligation to strive to create the most optimal learning environment and education system possible for our students. But it is with utmost confidence that I say achievement of the education system to which our students deserve, is only possible through the insulation and appreciation of their voices. Quite frankly, it is my opinion that this bill is one of the most tangible threats to the success of our academic institutions and works to undermine decades worth of progress made to amplify the voices of our state's most invaluable population. It is for this reason that I implore the committee to not only oppose this bill, but actively strive to achieve the opposite of what it seeks, empowerment of the student voice rather than diminishment. Thank you, and I yield the remainder of my time.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. We last have Ms. Tina Dove.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. I'm sheepish to follow all of these young people. They are amazing. I'm here for the record, Tina Dove, representing the Maryland State Education Association. We oppose HB 629 because we believe that civic engagement and individual agency are critical components of a healthy, functioning democracy. As a high school government teacher, I was responsible for teaching my students all about their government, how it was formed, the theories upon which our unique form of democracy is based, the historical struggles throughout US history to ensure that our democracy lived up to the principles contained in our Constitution and laws, and their individual responsibilities to hold our government accountable so that it lives out the words of our guiding documents. One of the most important lessons I taught my students was that our government is not a they, it's an us, that our democracy only works to the extent that we are all engaged with it. I was clearly successful, at least in one case. One of my students went on to become a duly elected current member of the Maryland House of Delegates. Seeing her use her voice in the service of our state and her constituents is one of the reasons why I became a teacher. This bill is not about me, and it's not about my former student. It's about the young people who testified here today. It's about denying their agency, their legitimacy of their thoughts and their voices, and their responsibility to participate in their democracy at the local level. Silencing our student members of the board when their vote runs afoul of the interests of the adults around them is abhorrent on its face. It is detrimental to our democracy writ large, and it directly contradicts all that their government teachers instill in them. Paul Robeson, a famous African-American activist, athlete, and artist, once said, "The answer to injustice is not to silence the critic, but to end the injustice." For those who support efforts to deprive our student members of the Board of Education a voice when it breaks a tie, I would suggest that a better way to influence the vote of your student member is to speak with them directly and make your case as to why you believe they should support your cause. Robbing them of their voice and their agency because they disagree with your perspective is antithetical to the basic democratic principles that we teach. If you're unsure about how these democratic principles work or what they are, feel free to reach out to me. As a government teacher, it'll be my pleasure to teach them to you. MSEA asks for an unfavorable report on HB 629. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Dove. And are there any questions for Ms. Hall, Ms. Raskin, and Ms. Dove? All right, thank you. Seeing none. Thank you, Delegate Novotny, for bringing us a very long bill today, a long bill hearing, that is. We will still welcome you back in the future with open arms.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Everyone who testified today on both sides of the issue. We will move next to Delegate Guyton's bill, House Bill 418.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Michelle Guyton, representing District 42B in Baltimore County. I am here to present House Bill 418, which is designed to ban hate symbols from Maryland public schools, unless the symbol is necessary for educational programming. The educational experiences of our diverse student body should not be marred by racist hate symbols from the past, such as Confederate flags, nooses, and swastikas. Allowing students or others to wear or display these symbols on school property or at school-sponsored events is both offensive and it is disruptive to the learning environment. So this bill grew out of my involvement with the Black Lives Matter organizers in my district in North Baltimore County, one of whom will testify today, and from my own observations and those of my children in schools throughout the state. I admit, and I'll put it out there right now, that I am particularly sensitive to the meaning of this symbolism, having grown up in Alabama. But simply put, there is no place in our public schools for these symbols of hate, particularly not during this time in history and in this state of Maryland. So even my husband's home state of Mississippi finally removed the Confederate flag from their state flag only a few months ago in response to the racial unrest in our country. And I do not believe that Maryland should be any less racially sensitive than Mississippi. My office led an effort in Baltimore County this summer to require this policy change, and with the support of the majority of our House delegation in Baltimore County and many of you who are here, and particularly our student board member, from whom you will also hear, that policy was adopted just last month by the Baltimore County Public Schools Board of Education. But hate is not just a Baltimore County issue, and that is why I bring it to you as a state bill. In response to a few questions I've received over the past several months, it is important to note, this is very important, that there is clearly no constitutional expectation of absolute freedom of speech within the public school system, particularly when a restriction involves symbols of clothing that is deemed to be disruptive or dangerous or bullying. All 24 jurisdictions in Maryland have some policies limiting freedom of expression in some capacity already in their code of conduct or their dress code. And in addition, multiple legal challenges to this precedent, including in Maryland, have, in this case specifically was related to the banning of hate symbols and the Confederate flag, have been dismissed. So Mr. Willems, who is my only opposition to this bill, actually makes this constitutional argument very well for me in his very supportive letter of opposition. So I would direct you to that. And he has a lot of precedence for this ruling in his letter. So school districts in other states such as Virginia, organizations like the Marine Corps and NASCAR have also condemned and banned the Confederate flag in light of recent national events and protests. And in Maryland, 7 jurisdictions, including Carroll County, Caroline, Howard, St. Mary's, Talbot, Wacomico, and now Baltimore County, specifically ban one or more of these symbols in their dress code. Montgomery County recently presented, I believe it was earlier this week, their policy to the Board of Education for future adoption. So you also have letters of support from Baltimore City Public Schools, Montgomery County Public Schools, Anne Arundel County Public Schools, the General Assembly Latino Caucus, several Democratic clubs, including the Young Democrats of Maryland Caucus of Color, the Baltimore Jewish Caucus, Council on American Islamic Relations, Maryland School Psychologists, and Chesapeake Regional Association of Student Councils, in addition to many students, parents, and teachers of all racial and religious backgrounds. I do want to note that our local NAACP sent a letter to the members of the Education Subcommittee, but it was not, for some reason, downloaded onto the site for the rest of you. So in closing, I strongly urge you to ban symbols of hate that disrupt and interfere with both the teacher's ability to teach and the students' ability to learn in our schools by supporting House Bill 418. I want to note that there is one amendment to this bill, couldn't be any simpler. I added a S to the word flags. because we recognize that there are many Confederate flags, and we don't want, even though generally the Confederate battle flag is the one that is most closely related to symbols of hatred, we don't want one of the others to pop up in its place. So we did pluralize flags. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Guyton. And I want to apologize to you. I jumped the gun. We did have one more person testifying on the last bill. And to members, it is a student, so definitely do not want to have him miss that opportunity since he did sign up, but in the wrong column. So I did want Drake Smith from Anne Arundel County to be able to speak. And we will come right back to all your witnesses, Delegate Guyton.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Kaiser. I really do appreciate that. We're all still learning the Zoom platform. Good afternoon, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and the honorable members of the Ways and Means Committee. My name is Drake Smith. I'm a senior at Meade High School in the IB Diploma Program and the student member of the Anne Arundel County Board of Education, the current student member, not to be confused with the first student member. I'm here to read a letter that was signed by 16 of the current SMOBs from around the state of Maryland, and it goes, "Dear honorable members of the Ways and Means Committee, we, the students of Maryland's Boards of Education, are opposed to House Bill 629, and it is with great disappointment that we even have to submit this testimony. Our commitment to student voice and advocacy led us to run for our positions, but House Bill 629 seeks to erode those very tenets. Most student board members in Maryland have a limited amount of issues they can vote on regardless. Further limiting that ability to put votes in, to vote puts the student member at the bottommost level of legitimacy on the board, therefore diminishing the student opinion to the least measure of importance. By nullifying the vote of the student board member in the event of a tie, the vote of the student member will never matter. You toss aside the experiences, time, and voices of the students. You tell the students that their hopes and yearnings are subject to the convenience of those in power. We know that, like us, you take every vote with your constituents' best interest in mind. Imagine that you made a vote and then someone wants to take your right to vote away because they disagreed with the vote. How would you feel? We ask that before you take this vote, you ask yourself, is disenfranchisement acceptable? By stripping away the student members' voting rights, we're effectively delegitimizing this essential position and setting an egregious precedent for the student voice across Maryland. We're taught in school each year to become civically engaged, to know the names of our representatives, to vote in every election after we turn 18, and to be the change we want to see in the world, and so much more. So how come when we are engaged in making real change on our local boards of education, our voice is threatened? When did civic engagement exclude educational policy? The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." So we urge you all to heed the words of Dr. King and stand in opposition to this bill, because a threat to our vote is a threat to everyone's vote. And this is signed in solidarity by the student member of Allegheny County, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Calvert County, Carroll County, Charles County, Frederick County, Garrett County, Harford County, Howard County, Kent County, the Maryland State Board of Education, Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and Washington County. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you all very much. Delegate Jones?
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. I appreciate that. Hello, Mr. Smith. How are you? Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. And let me just say that what an impressive, diverse group of student representatives. I so appreciate this testimony today. So impressive. Mr. Smith, you have been a pivotal, critical representative on our board, and I am so appreciative and glad to work with you. What are some, just an example of the last couple things you've worked on as a board member, just issues, the last 3 things you've worked on?
Thank you for your question, Delegate Jones. It's always a pleasure. I think the most recent one was student mental health. I'm sure we've all seen through this virtual learning environment that students just aren't engaged and they're truly having a hard time. And now counselors, teachers, principals can't really interact with students like they would do in the normal environment, right? Say, hey, how are you doing? Pull them aside somewhere and say, hey, you're looking a little sad today, or you just don't look like your cheerful sight, right? If I have my camera off, you can't really tell how I'm doing mentally. So I advocated for a student wellness survey. It would be the first one this year that we offered to students just to gauge how they're really doing in this virtual environment, because grades only really tell one half of the story, right? You can have an A+ student who's just really struggling with the isolation. And we want to make sure that, we know how our students are truly feeling. And we just got the results, and those results will be used by our mental health experts in Anne Arundel County Public Schools to come up with new programming to really help contact students are really, not struggling during this time.
Sorry about that.
Well, thank you so very much. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate your testimony. Thank you so much, Chairwoman.
Thank you. Delegate Guyton, back to your bill, and reminding everyone that we are on House Bill 418, and Delegate Guyton had already testified, and we will start with a few of the people. Start with Noreen Badwi. We have 9 people signed up.
Good afternoon again, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, members of the committee. My name is Noreen Badwi, and I'm here today to voice my strong support for House Bill 418. Maryland's public schools consist of 896,000 students, among which Maryland has one of the most diverse student body in the country. But with this diversity comes the systems that have marginalized groups of people and students in our country since the beginning of this country. With a student body as diverse as ours, and with an immense focus on public education for students to be informed members of society and free from distractions in the learning environment, I believe it is immensely important that our students should not be relegated to seeing offensive and hateful symbols within the buildings where they are there to learn and grow. Moreover, students learn about the horrors of slavery and the Holocaust in Maryland's public schools, but then simultaneously are allowed to view emblems of swastikas and Confederate flags to be displayed throughout their school building. Hate has no place in Maryland's public schools. Banning of hate symbols in schools should be unequivocally codified into law, and it is my strong belief that House Bill 418 is a more than reasonable and common sense bill that should receive a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we have signed up Ashley Esposito.
Hello, thank you for letting me share my opinion today. I'm Ashley Esposito, a student and a mother. I want to support House Bill 418, banning symbols in schools or hate symbols in schools. This is long overdue. I've been a representative for universities, and this is one of the issues that we've been trying to tackle too. It seems like every year we hit a wall because of the free speech argument. Leading up to the murder of Bowie student, Lieutenant Richard Collins III by a white supremacist, there were incidents on campuses using these symbols. And these were brought to the attention of like presidents and a representative in Congress. And every time they mentioned free speech as being a barrier for them to even address it. One president even went to Twitter and was mentioning like how they liked having like free speech displayed on campus right after an incident, which was alarming to the students. Yeah, the purpose of these symbols are hateful, and they're used as forms of intimidation against people of color like me and to organize like-minded individuals. So everyone that's silent is basically complicit to this. As a Black woman in this country, seeing these symbols immediately strikes fear into me. I take a mental note of who has it and know never to be alone with them. We shouldn't subject another generation of kids or my son to be conditioned to believe that these symbols are heritage, not hate. You're more than welcome to fly an Italian flag, an Irish flag, or any other cultural flag. These are not cultural symbols. They are tied to the enslavement and murder of Black people and the Holocaust. We will never truly become an anti-racist society until we're not creating safe spaces for racist and white supremacy. And this is what we've kind of accidentally allowed by not condemning it. I'm hopeful that the Maryland General Assembly will make it clear that these are hate symbols and they're not allowed in schools, and that anybody that opposes this is complicit with white supremacy and responsible for any violence that happens in the name of these symbols. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I'm gonna take a break here after two of the people testified to give both Delegate Guyton and the first 2 witnesses a chance to answer questions. When I went back to the other young man for a moment, I missed that chance of opening up questions for Delegate Guyton. So if anyone has questions for the delegate or either of the first 2 people who spoke, She's ready for your questions, everyone. All right, Delegate Ivy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much, Delegate Guyton, for this bill. Really think it's a wonderful piece of legislation, long overdue here in the state of Maryland. Really only had a slight suggestion. I was looking at the actual text of the legislation. The symbol of hate includes a new swastika and a Confederate flag. I know you had the amendment to add the S to flag, but there are other flags that also exemplify hate and instill fear and things of that nature into people. So would you be willing to possibly look at kind of expanding the scope of that?
Thank you so much, Delegate Ivy. I really appreciate your question. That is something we have discussed quite a lot over the past months since we've been working on this bill. If you look at the text of the bill, if that's before you, if not, later.
It's right here. Yeah.
A1. So we do define symbol of hate, and that really encompasses anything that expresses animus towards an individual on the basis not just of race or color, but also gender identity, religion, sexual orientation, disability, or national origin. So that is encompassed in the definition of a symbol of hate. With the inclusion of the 3 symbols of hate, noose, swastika, and the Confederate flags, we are not in any way excluding any others. And so I made sure that when we drafted this bill, that we left it open to the LEAs, because they are the ones that are actually going to be developing this policy, to be able, to, unfortunately evolve as hatred evolves, which we know it does. Because there are symbols that we can't even begin to imagine right now that may pop up next year or in 10 years. So we don't want to tie it all down in statute. Sure. But also each place has sort of a different issue that they're really working with. So I wanted to give the local some flexibility to make it work for them. But if you want to talk about that more and add some more specificity, we can certainly do that.
Thank you so much for this piece of legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Ivy. I know she appreciated that. Next question, Miss Willett. I closed the document for a second while I was trying to send it to somebody else. Give me a moment, please, to invite the next person up. Sorry. All right, Barbara Willett. Is she here? Victoria Schatz?
I do see her.
Okay, let's go with Victoria Schatz first.
Hi, thank you, Chair Kaiser, Vice Chair Washington, and Ways and Means Committee for your time. For the record, I am Vita Schatz, a senior at a Baltimore County high school, a member of the Black Lives Matter group in Northern Baltimore County, and a member of Baltimore Hebrew Congregation. I am testifying in support of House Bill 418 to ban hate symbols in Maryland schools. This bill prohibits hate symbols from school property that includes but is not limited to Confederate flags, swastikas, and nooses, although they will be allowed for educational purposes only. Confederate flags are historically known as a symbol of racism, slavery, and segregation. Swastikas symbolize anti-Semitism and terror. Nooses symbolize brutality, fear, and hatred. Some students display these symbols with the intention of making their classmates feel uncomfortable and unsafe. Others may not realize the impact displaying these symbols have on their classmates. My high school is 85% white and predominantly Christian. Numerous symbols of hate are displayed on campus with nothing being done about it. Sophomore and junior year, I met with my principal to talk about implementing a policy, and he said it was above a school-level decision. It is unacceptable that students who display hate symbols on their clothes, phone cases, and as a huge flag hanging off the back of their car do not face consequences. Last year, we had a big problem with swastikas being carved into boys' bathroom stalls. Our administration had to close all of their bathrooms except one to keep an eye on them. Students thought this was funny. As a Jewish student, I found it terrifying that this is normal where I go to school. This symbol represents millions dead, and that is somehow funny. There needs to be an end to this. There was also an incident where a student was wearing a Confederate flag on his belt and shoved it in a Black student's face.
That student faced no consequences even after the Black student's parent complained to the school. These are just two examples of how hate symbols disturb learning at school. Coming to school to see students comfortable with displaying hate symbols is scary. As a state, we cannot keep allowing this to be acceptable. Students should never have to fear going to school because of their race, religion, ethnicity, or culture. I believe in freedom of speech, but hate symbols do not have a place in schools. In Baltimore County, there are already policies banning vulgar language, weapons, illegal or harmful products, and depictions of gang affiliations. But why aren't hate symbols included? It is necessary for students and staff to feel safe in their learning and working environment. House Bill 418 banning hate symbols from school property needs to be supported to protect all children and employees in the Maryland school system. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll go back to Barbara Willett.
Hello, everyone. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and committee members. I am in favor of House Bill 418. My name is Barbara Willett. I'm a retired Baltimore County Public Schools teacher. The majority of my 34 years in the classroom were spent at the high school level. During that time, I once gave T-shirts to my assistant principal. She had a box of them in her office for students who needed to swap out a shirt that had alcohol, tobacco, sexual images for one that did not violate the dress code. Students complied, although sometimes grudgingly. They were teenagers. A ban of hate symbols in our schools makes clear that images such as a noose, swastika, Confederate flag, some tattoos are equally inappropriate as those I've just mentioned. They demean, intimidate, exclude, harass, bully, and do promote hatred. They stand for ideologies which oppose fairness and equality. Those rights given to us, regardless of race, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. Aside from their use in structured lessons, they have no place in our schools where our purpose is to educate with facts, teach critical thinking skills, and create lifelong learners. Critical thinking ensures that our right to freedom of expression does not give license to anything goes. Freedom comes with responsibility. During virtual learning last spring, my teacher friend taught a student who had 2 Confederate flags on the wall behind him. How receptive to facts and critical thinking was this young man? And how composed was my social studies teacher friend when seeing those flags on her computer screen every day? I wonder if her student knows my former older students who wore Confederate flag t-shirts to class and now display that symbol of oppression on their Facebook profiles. The symbols of slavery and the Holocaust multiply when unchecked by those who can do something. Legislators, you can squelch exclusion and hatred during the formative years of our future leaders by voting yes to Bill 418. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Willett. Next up, we have Matt Peterson.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Delegate Ludke and members of the committee. I want to testify on behalf of the Baltimore Jewish Council in favor of House Bill 418. The swastika and Confederate flag are 2 symbols that have only one meaning in today's society, and it is hate. When I personally see a swastika, it immediately brings up a lot of different emotions for me as a Jewish person. First is fear, discomfort, and then I begin to think about just what the symbol stands for. I begin to think about the Holocaust, the horrors of that, and the ugliness of Nazi ideology. And the Confederate flag is no different. It stands for obviously slavery and Jim Crow segregation. And I can only imagine what other horrible thoughts it evokes for people of color. These symbols, which, like as I said, bring up so much fear and negative emotion, have no place in a learning environment outside of a textbook. we can never allow them to be normalized by those who don't understand the full history and meaning behind them, or those who do and use them as a tactic of fear, intimidation, and to hurt others. At the BJC, we work every day to educate people about the Holocaust and hate and how it's allowed to be spread when it is normalized. And we unfortunately have far too many examples of this to draw on from history. And we're seeing an increase in incidents of hate that use these symbols, whether it's a spray painting on a building or, you know, hanging of a noose or anything like that. And it oftentimes is able to happen because people don't understand the real power of these symbols, because sometimes they see them every day, and it's really awful things that begin to happen when we allow that them to be seen. So with that in mind, I want to thank you again for your time and ask for a favorable report on House Bill 418.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Next up, we have Joshua Muhumuza.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair and honorable delegates. My name is Joshua Muhumuza, and I'm the current student board member for Baltimore County. It's a great honor to testify in favor of House Bill 418. I and many other students, especially those of color, thank Delegate Guyton for her steadfast support for the removal of abhorrent symbols like Confederate flags and swastikas from our school premises. Inscribed in our student and faculty handbooks in Baltimore County and in many other districts are various behaviors and actions that are prohibited, like vulgar language, attire that references gangs and nudity, and violence. What is missing in the handbook is language that specifically addresses by name hate symbols. Many may argue that schools have policies that denounces discrimination of all kind. And although that may be true, we still hear cases of students feeling emboldened to wear attire that promulgates hateful messages. And because such a ban is not specifically inscribed in our school policies, the enforcement is not uniform throughout our school system. School districts around the state have adopted or are in the process of adopting language that solidifies this ban. But with all that has occurred from last year's and the continued reckoning on race, it would send a prodigious message to our students and families that our state strongly condemns the displaying of these symbols in and near our institutions of learning. As a Black man living in this very polarized and racially hostile period of our time, I implore members of this committee to not only conscientiously deliberate on this bill, but also take the time when making your position to think about the pain and sorrow that symbols like the Confederate flag and swastikas cause in individuals that look like me and those that don't. Author and civil rights attorney Brian Stevenson, in his book Just Mercy, wrote, "Terrorist groups like the Ku Klux Klan cloak themselves in symbols of the Confederate flag, the Confederate South, to intimidate and victimize thousands of Black people. Nothing unnerved rules Black settlements more than rumors about nearby Klan activity. For 100 years, a sign of Black progress in the South could trigger a white reaction that would invariably invoke Confederate symbols and talks of resistance. I know that many would argue that symbols like Confederate flags are part of our country's culture, especially in the South. But for Black people, the mere sight of these dreadful symbols catalyzes many emotions of heartache, and it causes many to feel unwelcomed in their own country. Symbols like this have the power to break the souls of many of our minority groups. And since symbols like the Confederate flag and swastikas were proliferated by those that sought to destroy the American Union, they should be fully condemned by everyone. No student should ever have to see these symbols in any place other than history books and course materials when learning of the dark periods of our history. As we saw with the recent January 6th attack on the Capitol, white supremacists wore or carried with them hateful symbols that were meant to scare and terrorize their victims. On television, our youth saw angry men and women trotting around in the people's house with hate symbols, chasing down our law enforcement, and shouting vile and despicable things. I know those people don't represent this country. As a first-generation immigrant, I love standing up and sharing our values. But I have to say, our society is divided. We need to heal. We need to show the next generation that we're above the hate of this and the previous generations, and that hate symbols have no place in our society. I ask this committee to stand up for American values, our diversity, and our children, and vote for this bill. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mahumza, for your testimony and your service on the board. And also, as somebody whose last name is often mispronounced, I apologize for mispronouncing your last name. I'll hand it back over now to Chair Kaiser.
And thank you. I'll next go to Samay Kindra.
Hi, thank you, Chair Kaiser, and thank you to Delegate Michelle Guyton for proposing this bill. My name is Samay Kindra. I am a first-year law student at the University of Maryland. I'm here today in my capacity as chair of the Caucus of Color of the Young Democrats of Maryland. Unfortunately, over the past 4 years, we've seen the reality that hatred and prejudice, they're alive and well in our country. We would like to think that it's not, but it clearly is. And more importantly, that hate and prejudice does not have a place in our schools. Schools are supposed to be a place where students feel the most safe, the safest, the most welcome, that they feel included in a part of their school community. They're there to learn about the world around them and to learn the skills that they need to be productive members of society. They can't do so when they're surrounded by such symbols of hate. These symbols, they represent regimes and eras whose agendas threaten the very existence of these students' ancestors. I want to point out for a second sort of the gross irony that while they learn about these symbols and what they mean, and that they threaten the very existence of their ancestors, they have to look to their left and right and see these on patches on people's backpacks, or as we've heard many times, on belts or on shirts. That's just horrendous to think about, that irony that you have to learn about these symbols that threaten your very existence, and you learn how awful they were, and now you have to see them around you. And oftentimes I think in this argument of hate symbols, and we saw it with statues, throughout the summer and past couple of years, there's this notion that we're somehow whitewashing history. We're getting rid of the bad parts of history. And that is not what we are trying to do. It is extremely important. It's imperative that we learn about even the darkest moments of our history. There's no reason for students not to learn that. But there's no reason that students should have to face these symbols that are symbols of those darkest moments. There's simply no reason for it. And I also want to bring up a point that was brought up by, I believe it was Ms. Esposito earlier, and a couple other people have given testimony today of the fact of how prevalent these symbols are in other parts of society. I graduated from the University of Maryland College Park last May, and during my 4 years there, I was a member of SGA, and numerous times we came up against issues of hate symbols, nooses, popping up on campus, people hanging nooses in hallways. And I think one thing that this would do, that the delegates bill would do by banning hate symbols in schools, it stops the normalization of these symbols. It stops the normalization of the Confederate flag, of the noose, so that down the road it doesn't trickle down. If kids early on learn that these things are not things to use to make fun of, as someone said, or to poke jokes with, we can hopefully see that down the line has a trickle down effect, and we don't see them on college campuses and further down than that, the world around us. So with that, I want to thank you again, Delegate Guyton, for bringing up this bill, and thank you to the committee for hearing me today. And I really do urge and hope that you guys will get back to a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to give a chance if anyone has questions for the, I think Ms. Willett, Ms. Schatz, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Mahumza, and Samay Kindra. Any questions? All right, I'll invite up the next two. We have Zainab Chowdhury.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Kaiser and members of the House Ways and Means Committee. My name is Zainab Chowdhury. I'm here to testify on behalf of the Council on American Islamic Relations. I thank you for this opportunity to speak in strong support of House Bill 418, and sponsored by Delegate Guyton. CARE is America's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization. Following a long string of incidents across the state where hate symbols such as nooses and swastikas have been discovered on school property, school administrative officials are taking action to discourage and take appropriate disciplinary measures against those responsible for these incidents. Last fall, in a unanimous vote, for example, the Howard County Public School System's Board of Education updated its existing policy to ban the Confederate flag, swastikas, and other symbols that it deemed as promoting hatred, intimidation, or harassment from school property. This ban applies to clothing, vehicles, and, as mentioned before, school-related events as well. The board updated its bullying, harassment, and intimidation policy as well, and the student code of conduct. In a statement, the Howard County School Superintendent, Dr. Michael Martorano, explained that the revised policy was necessary because the school system's guidelines should evolve with new realities, quote unquote. He said that the new language was an example of school administrators and staff remaining vigilant to the welfare and the needs of the student body, especially diverse student bodies. My organization has called on multiple Maryland school systems in the recent past to take action after racist, hateful incidents, including in Anne Arundel County, where these have included, for example, AP class essay written by a student suggesting the extermination of the Black race, a racist petition circulated by the Cool Kids Klan, a thinly veiled reference to the KKK, swastikas and racial slurs discovered on school property, and nooses that have also been discovered, either painted, spray painted, or discovered in physical manifestation on school property. As a civil rights organization dedicated to defending and upholding our Constitution, protecting free speech is an important priority for us. However, we do believe that in light of increased intolerance sweeping across our nation, especially underscored not only by the 4 years of the previous White House administration's discriminatory policies and the rising threat of white supremacy that led to the insurrection in part at the US Capitol last month, we have a collective responsibility to balance defending free speech with ensuring a safe, inclusive learning environment for all of our students, regardless of their race, religion, ethnicity, or other protected classes. We support this bill that would require each county board of education to adopt a formal policy prohibiting the use or display of a hate symbol under certain circumstances. However, we do request an amendment where if that such symbol were to be placed on clothing or book bags or similar items, that it remain completely concealed for the entire duration of the time that that student or staff faculty member is on school grounds. We thank you for this consideration. We would like to thank Delegate Guyton again for her leadership on this issue, and we urge a favorable report. I yield my time.
Thank you. And we have one more person to testify on this bill. Welcome back, Carmeli Leal.
Hello again, delegates. Thank you for the opportunity to speak once again before you. Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Carmeli Leal, a senior at Eastern Technical High School in Baltimore County, and I am in support of House Bill 418. Previously, I was going to mention an amendment, but it seems that Delegate Guyton has already had that covered, and so we are completely on the same wavelength. But it goes without saying that all students deserve to learn in safe environments that affirm their identities and give them the best possible chance in their education. Schools must be free from these symbols that have long histories of hate, discrimination, and violence, especially among students who identify as Black or Jewish. Not even counting these symbols that exist within our schools, these students already deal with obstacles upon obstacles to their education, such as educational inequities, the school-to-person pipeline, and so much more. This bill, frankly, is the least that we can do to protect these students. In my position as a student leader within the state and in Baltimore County, there are too many times when I speak to students that see these symbols within their school buildings and have been told or expected to simply ignore these horrific symbols. And I too myself have gone ahead and see these things within our Maryland public school education. They are an egregious disruption to the learning environment, the environment that is integral to all of our students. I must also point out that one of the missions of the Maryland State Board of Education is to promote a safe, healthy, and orderly environment for learning and teaching, which a value I'm sure that we can all share. This bill does exactly that for all students and should be codified into law. Delegate Guyton, I thank you for this bill, and I urge that this bill garners a favorable report. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ms. Leal? Sorry, I didn't pronounce it right the first time. Are any questions? If not, members, we're done with the hearing on House Bill 418. We have 3 bills remaining with even fewer people testifying. So going next, we have Delegate Long, House Bill 566.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Long day. I'm here for the record, Delegate Bob Long, on the record, testify on House Bill 566. This would require Baltimore County schools to have implement virtual learning. One of the good things that we can find from what's happened with this pandemic, some students have excelled learning online. Other students have really stumbled and fell, had some real problems with it. But anyway, it's something we really need to take a look at. I looked into the bill and some of the comments, and I wrote the bill in such a way that I would expect the education subcommittee to deal with some of these issues. I'm not an expert in education, like the date when it would be implemented, and also what grade levels. Everyone that I've talked to that's actually excelled has been in high school. I guess, for whatever reason, they're doing very well. We actually had a meeting with Baltimore County, the gentleman that's building the new schools, and he said his daughter's virtual learning. He's doing very well with it. She's doing very well with it. And I hear a lot of stories about how students are excelling with this. And it also gives an opportunity for students that are possibly falling behind to be able to review the classes, in a later time. So if you're struggling in math, maybe you could go back and look at that, that class that you missed, or, you had some time struggling with. I know I do a lot of virtual learning because I have to take 15 hours every 2 years continuing ed. And I have to go back sometimes to read it twice, maybe 3 times. But it's good learning experience to be able to have that tool, I would think. Anyway, I would request a favorable vote, and I'd be willing to work with the education subcommittee, and let's see if we can't get this moving in the right direction, since it's definitely going to be here for a while. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Long. Any questions for Delegate Long? All right, thank you very much.
Are we all still awake?
It looks like it. People are feeling.
My brain's fried. It's been a long day.
It's been a long week for sure.
Yes, it has. I think we're
Delegate Ivy has 2 bills. Delegate 2 that you're speaking on for behalf of Prince George's County. You want to start with 621?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. House Bill 621 is a bill that is not new to our committee. It's been proposed by Delegate Walker for a handful of years. This is the bill for daily physical activity for Prince George's County. It has yet to be voted on in our county delegation, and yet we're asking for a favorable report on House Bill 621. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, of course, we obviously don't take action until we hear from the delegation. Any questions for Delegate Ivy? All right, Delegate, House Bill 624.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a bill that I've proposed. It's a local bill, and it would make changes to our County Board of Education, as we've spent a whole bunch of time today discussing. Right now in Prince George's County, we have a hybrid board, and this bill, as introduced, it would do away with our appointed membership. Right now, as drafted, there is a phase out period, but we're still working on some amendments that we can all get behind as a county delegation. There are other provisions as well that are significant, but we are yet to find consensus on. So until we do vote it out favorably, of course, we won't be asking for this committee to move on it. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for Delegate Ivy? All right, thank you, Delegate. We are done with the hearing for today. Are there any announcements from any of the subcommittee chairs? All right, seeing none. Sarah or Haley, can you cut the feed?